first panel today. They're going to speak about how we can understand how advocates and parents and educators evaluate and take action to support children's academic progress. And to introduce the panel, I'm going to welcome Senior Director of Education Policy and Advocacy for the National Urban League, Ms. Adenike Huggins.
Thank you, Renee. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce our two speakers this morning, our two panelists, Shana McIver, who is the Senior Director of Learning and Practice at Learning Bureaus, and Dory McCarron, who's the Community Engagement Associate at EdChoice. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So Shane and I are super excited to start off this morning talking about learning the perspective of parents and advocates in the educational space. We wanted to have it be a little bit interactive for this first thing, so we don't want to keep talking at you. So we're going to do a little poll. Because both of our presentations are about polling research and the findings that our organization got. And so we kind of wanted you all to be a part of that as well. And so if you guys could scan the QR code or go to slido.com on your devices, that will be the pin that you put in, and then we will both are starting already. I see phones out. And in this virtual land, if you go to slido.com and do the same thing, we want you to participate as well. So the first question, it should pop up on your devices. It did. If you are or were I'm going to change parent to caregiver because I like that word that we used yesterday, of a child performing on grade level, what do you think you would worry about the most? So let's see what people are. The next question. Who do you guys, in your opinion, who do you think is held most responsible for their child's success in school? What skills do you value the most in your students' education? school choice options in your state. Okay, awesome. So we will talk about all of these answers as we go through our presentations, but I'm going to pass it on.
Thanks, Dory. As Dory mentioned, you will see what some families said across the nation to some of those, their responses to some of those questions. As Adenike mentioned, I'm Shana McIver. I'm the Senior Director for Learning and Practice at Learning Heroes. So I'm pleased to be here with you, super excited. And I'm going to talk to you, take a few minutes to present on how good grades can sideline families. Deflation, a term you may or may not have heard of yet, but by the time I'm done presenting, I hope you have a good understanding of what we mean. I'm going to present on a recent study done and made possible between a collaboration between Learning Heroes and Gallup, who conducted the research. Should I get nifty? Yeah. Okay, before I jump into it, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Learning Heroes' mission and vision. I recently joined Learning Heroes just a few months ago. I'm pleased to do the work that I did for Baltimore City Public Schools. I was the Director of Family Engagement there. So I'm elated to do what I did and what I love for a city I love on a national level. So I'm going to read it verbatim to you. The mission is to engage parents and caregivers as their children's most effective advocate by ensuring they have a complete, holistic, and accurate picture of their children's progress and success. And the vision is that every parent and caregiver becomes a learning hero, advocating effectively for their child's academic, social, and emotional success, driving equitable school improvement. Okay. Our organization has 3 work streams you see displayed here. One is communication. Our small but mighty communications team takes information and creates content rather, and amplifies that information for educators, for parents, for even those in the field, all around student achievement and wellness. Secondly, we have capacity building. Capacity building focused on effective and equitable school-home partnerships. One of which is the first slide you see there, Family Engagement Leadership Institute. So that's why I came to Learning Heroes. I co-lead the Family Engagement Leadership Institute with Dr. A.L. Bergman. And this 9-month institute is focused on building the capacity of school and district leaders around leading with family engagement as a priority, right? Not as a siloed body of work, but with everything they do, prioritizing family engagement, and therefore there's a trickle-down effect in the schools and the districts that they work in. So this 9-month institute, it includes one-to-one coaching for leaders, from former leaders and other experts, small pod learning environments with light roles, as well as whole group virtual sessions, where we have keynote speakers, phenomenal speakers like our senior advisor, Dr. Karen Matt, and other experts around family and community engagement. We have a knowledge capture process also, so that we can constantly assess the effectiveness of the work that we're doing. And so when the principals and district leaders leave, CAOs, CEOs, you name it, when they leave with a plan for the next year around family and community engagement, as well as an action team in their schools to help them implement said plan. So that's our goal, and that's one of the examples of the professional learning that we offer. But we also offer professional learning for teachers as well. And lastly, the research, which is why I'm here. Not the work I own directly, but what I'm here to talk to you all about today. Okay. We couldn't do this work alone. Here's just a glance of, some of the partnerships that we have. Our partnerships are broad and deep. which include media outlets, school districts, and other national nonprofits. So come talk to me when we're done, maybe we can partner as well. So while the research that I'm going to share with you is reputable, the margin of error is slim, Learning Heroes prides itself, we pride ourselves in making sure that we hear directly from families. So much so that we have formed a family advisory board where we have parent leaders from across the nation who talk to us regularly, monthly, and provide us feedback and insight on the work that we're doing. The faces that you see here are a few of those families. If you could just bear with me and take a moment before we jump into the data, I'd like to share a video with you about Miss Sharita in the middle and her daughter Christiana. And I think that the video gives a great framing for the data that we'll look at.
Sound it out. What's the first three letters say? What's the first three letters? Act. It turns two words into one word.
Sharita Jones is a hands-on mom.
That's what you said.
She felt her daughter Christiana was doing well in her last school, especially after all the time away from the classroom during the pandemic.
Christiana was a great student in class, not a behavior problem at all. I thought that she was doing great from the last report card.
But when her daughter Christiana moved to a new school, she learned her good report cards had not been telling the full story.
It was extremely surprising to find out that she was on a lower reading level than what I thought she was.
The new school's assessments showed the 9-year-old was actually 3 grade levels behind.
Add the rest of it in there. True. Lee.
Actually.
So what's the word?
Actually.
Exactly. Actually.
Good grades can be deceiving. Maya Martin Cadogan is the founder and executive director of Parents Amplifying Voices in Education.
What we actually know is that many kids are not on grade level, and that grades are oftentimes reflecting things that are not just about academics. They're reflecting behavior, attendance, participation.
In fact, there's a dramatic disconnect with parents when looking at their own kids on how much academic learning has suffered since the end of the pandemic. Nationally, 9 out of 10 parents, regardless of race, income, or geography, believe their child is at or above grade level. But just 26% of 8th graders are proficient in math, and only 29% are proficient in reading. What should parents do?
Parents need to first just ask questions of their child's teacher. They need to ask what grade level their children were reading on, what level math their children were doing, and then ask what you can do at home with your child in order to support them, and what additional programs they might need access to extend their learning.
I would say to parents to not be afraid, to ask for help. Having that shared power between me and the teacher is a wonderful feeling.
There have never been more resources available than right now to help kids get back on track. To learn more about how you can help your child, check out gobeyondgrades.org.
Somebody came through the drive-thru. I looked at the ID. It said Mindy.
You knew Mindy.
I did. I said, "Oh my gosh, hi, Mindy." And this person just drove away. I had a hold put on the account.
Right? I'm sure there are lots of thoughts about the video regarding Ms. Sharita and Christiana. And when we have an opportunity for Q&A, if you have thoughts, please jot them down and we can talk about those and discuss them. Okay, let's look at the methodology for this study. The study was conducted October the 2nd through the 9th of this year. Close to 2,000 surveys were collected from U.S. adults who self-identified themselves as parents or caregivers of students who are in public K-12 schools. Roughly 22% of the participants said that their child had an IEP or 504 plan. However, parents who said their child had a diagnosed and significant cognitive disability did not participate. Responses were collected using the Gallup panel, a probability-based panel that selects respondents using a random digital dial. Weighting was conducted to ensure the sample was representative and matched national parent demographics, gender, age, race, Hispanic ethnicity, and education, with cross-classified targets with race. And there was an oversampling of Black and and Hispanic parents so we can identify any differences by race and ethnicity. And the margin of error is about 3.1 percentage points. So, almost 9 in 10, if you saw in the video, 9 in 10 parents overall say that their children are performing at or above grade level in either reading or math. And this is regardless of race, ethnicity, income, or educational level. About 6 in 10 are confident that their child will be ready and prepared for college. About 60% are confident that their child will be ready and prepared. Interestingly, this percentage has decreased some. Parents are still feeling confident, but less are sure that their kids will be ready for college upon graduation. When you think about your child's report cards, what grades do they typically get? 79% say that they get B's or above. And for Black families, 73% said that their children get B's or above. When you think about your child's report card, what grades do they typically get? When asked, when it comes to reading, is your child achieving?
Is this pre-pandemic, post-pandemic?
Post. October the 2nd through the 9th, the study was conducted.
This year? 2023?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
This slide shows that 85% of parents will say their kids are at or above grade level, say that their kids are getting mostly B's, which makes sense. 36% of parents will say that their child is below level in reading, also say that their children get B's or above. Give you a moment to look at this slide. For parents who say that their child is above grade level, the top worry that is the impact of social media, followed by their child feeling stress and anxiety. These are all legitimate concerns. But look at what is at the bottom of that list. The child's math and reading. But what about among the parents who think that their child is below grade level? While they're still very concerned about those other things, about social media, bullying, the social emotional wellness of their children, the child's math skills goes from the bottom to the top. And what this says is if parents are aware, they worry differently. Their focus is different. Give a moment to look at this slide as well. Couple seconds. Parents who say that their child is below grade level in reading and math are more likely to discuss academic topics with their child's teacher. So those parents were asked, what is it that you discuss? Right? So the blue is representative of all parents, the yellow is representative of parents who have children who are below grade level in math, and the lighter blue is parents among those who have children that are below level in reading. What I imagine you'll take away is that parents who say that their child is below grade level in reading or math are more likely to discuss academic topics. So when we know, we act. Given the scenario on the right, here's how parents responded. So parents were asked if your child got a B on their report card, but performed below level on standardized tests and other, statewide standardized tests and other district tests, performed below grade level, how concerned would you be? You look at the line for Black parents, 72% of Black parents would be very or extremely concerned compared to 56% of all parents. Not only do parents worry differently, they take action. This slide shows that if parents think their child is below grade level in math or reading, they're going to talk to the teacher about the concern. They're going to talk to their child about the concern. They're going to make sure that their child has a tutor. They're going to jump in to help. And again, on this slide, the data about Black parents sticks out. All parents are more likely to take action. Black parents really stand out because 80% are saying that they're going to take action and discuss their child's grade level performance. 78% saying they're going to talk to their child, and 50% say that they're going to get a tutor. So I have a few recommendations based on the data that was shared. And I wish I could go longer, but I'm sharing this space with my colleague Dory, so I just want to share a few recommendations about the data. I want to start by saying let's fight the right fight. This is about math and reading. Not necessarily about what books kids should read or whether the curricula is appropriate for the child. It's about making sure that our kids have what they need to thrive, to be successful. 81% of parents say that their students' reading skills, need good reading skills to get a good job. They say they need math skills to be successful in life. So parents care. Parents are ready and they know what their children need, and they're ready to focus on that and support, and so educators need to be ready for that. And so that leads to my next recommendation, leaning into strong parent-teacher relationships. There's so much research out there that shows us that authentic relationships, relational trust between the schoolhouse and parents is so important and yields positive results for young people. Young people graduate, they come to school. I could go on, the climate in schools is more positive when those relationships are robust. Educators want to stay in their schools, right? And the community even is more involved when that happens. So for this recommendation, I say that, parents are ready to take on the responsibility. Educators, I think educators want the best for children for the most part as well. So it's time to lean into parent-teacher relationships. And lastly, connecting parents with multiple measures of achievement. Parents rely on report cards, and that's not a problem. But grades don't equate to grade level mastery. So we need to make sure that parents are also referencing other data points and other measures. It's time to go beyond grades, you all. I'm getting signaled that I'm at time or about at time, and so it's perfect because I have concluded my presentation. Oh, I do have one more slide, I'm sorry. I just wanted to share, I spoke early on about partnerships and how we couldn't do this work without strong partnerships. And here's one example, focused around the deflation, right? Parents' perceptions not necessarily being the reality all the time. And this image that you see here is Houston's Urban League hosting a family workshop using some of Learning Heroes resources to help not only bring awareness to this disconnect, but also help families understand what they can do. So thank you for this time, and I'm going to turn it over to Dory.
And that's Shayna's contact information. But yeah. So yes, I am Dory. I am the Community Engagement Associate at EdChoice. I'm super excited to be here. This is a new role for me, so this is kind of my first little foray into getting into community engagement, so I'm excited to be here with you guys. So my presentation is going to be about Black parents, and not just Black parents, but advocates in the educational reform space as well, and other organizations that are trying to boost the whole experience for not just students of color, but for all students. So a little bit about EdChoice. We are a 501c3 nonprofit or nonpartisan, and our mission is to advance educational freedom and the choices for all as a pathway to a stronger society. So we did this focus group and then the following public opinion poll, this year in January or February, and we really just wanted to focus on gaining perspectives of pretty much arguably the most key of stakeholders, parents and families who have school-aged children. And so we partnered with the Phoenix group, and they did 3 different focus groups for us in Washington, D.C., and we're going to dive into some of them. So this is just some of the demographics of the focus group. Shout out to National Urban League. I'm repping my little YP pen, so I'm super excited to be sharing their insights as well. And we have parents of elementary school kids, middle school kids, as well as high school kids. But we know that oftentimes it can be certain advocates are pitted against each other, unfortunately, and we wanted to make sure that this is an inclusive conversation. So we also wanted to bring in educators, homeschool educators. Somebody yesterday said she's a homeschool mom, shout out to you. And so we wanted to make sure that all voices were heard in this whole experience. So I'll dive into each of these bullet points in the following slides, but some of the key insights for the current state of education was one of the things that we asked our focus groups about. And high level kind of stuff is parents prefer that their child's educational environment focuses on giving them the space to grow without fear of failure, because that can be a very detrimental impact that would deter students from even wanting to go to class. Yesterday we talked about chronic absenteeism, and so a lot of things are playing into that as well. Parents define success in learning not only by their children's preparation for the next grade level, but also by their development as lifelong learners. Parents unanimously agree that learning life skills in school are more important. However, students are not receiving sufficient development in this area. And the pandemic forced parents to take a more active role, kind of what Shane was talking about. Grade inflation, I guess, has been an unfortunate part of some students' educational journeys, and so we want to make sure that students are not just getting passed through just to keep the classroom size smaller and whatnot, but that they actually are mastering these skills that they're supposed to be learning throughout the course of the year. So like I said, we wanted to talk about the current state of education in caregivers' perspectives and their opinion. So the first one, a great education is empowering and supportive. The whole convening is to empower parents and make sure that they know all of their options. That's another big goal for EdChoice specifically, is to make sure that you know all of the different options that you have for your student so that you can make the best decision for their learning. Parents prefer that their child's educational environment focuses on giving them space to grow, like I said, and parents want a system of education that does not label their student or put them in competition with their peers. One of the quotes from one of the participants is in this little bubble here: put them in a position to become successful adults, not just textbook education, but a holistic approach with life skills. I feel like oftentimes it's not a holistic approach, and it's not the wraparound services that are also provided in schools. And so we wanted to ask parents and families what they wanted to see, or how they wanted to see change in that area. So this slide kind of goes with the Slido question from the beginning. That's why I wanted to ask you guys about it, because in our focus groups we found some interesting opinions of what people think the purpose of education is in general. And so the desired life skills that we found were most important to families was building moral character, independent and critical thinking, getting ready for the future employment, whatever that looks like, and social interaction with their peers. The pandemic definitely shifted a lot of things for schooling and the way that people even think about education, where learning can happen. Learning can happen anywhere. I feel like we've kind of figured that out even more so as well. And since the pandemic and school closures and things like that, families had to take a more active role in their students' learning. And I think a lot of parents kind of figured out like just what their kids were learning and what they thought the kids were learning, they actually weren't, and things like that, and the difficulty and the rigor of the material. So I feel like it was definitely a learning process for everybody, but especially families as well. And then I just want to highlight that last bullet point. Homeschooling gave parents a new outlook on the education system and influenced them to advocate more for their children and teachers as well. So now I'm going to pivot to the educational opportunities that parents wanted to see. Like I said, homeschooling has been viewed as a positive option. You have the freedom to teach under many different curriculums if you choose. That's what one of the participants told us. And parents view homeschooling as very brave. It does take a lot to decide to teach your student in the home and taking on not only your parental role, but teacher role as well, in a different kind of capacity. The concern of most parents is ensuring their children do not miss out on the social component of going to physical traditional school. Micro schools have been more popular, especially as a pandemic and since the pandemic. So they are a hidden gem most parents haven't heard of before. However, once they are introduced to the idea, they are wanting more information about it. School voucher system is surrounded by controversy. One person said, as soon as you say the word choice or school choice, parents sometimes tune out. In the South, the word voucher is racially charged, causing a lot of people in the Black community to not support the program because of racial tension and the stigma behind it. And there's a sentiment that children who are accepted into a school using the voucher system are not treated fairly. So a certain type of school choice is educational savings accounts. They're a very flexible program that families can use funds to, kind of what Shane was saying earlier, use them for tutoring or supplemental curriculum or different therapies and things like that. So they really give families the most amount of flexibility in kind of tailoring and creating their students' learning for their specific needs. Open enrollment has unfortunate barriers to entry. One of the quotes we heard was, if open enrollment didn't exist, Black and brown families would suffer. At the same time, if you don't know how to use it, you're still suffering. And that's definitely true for a lot of different programs. If you don't know how to use it, or if there's a million hoops that you have to jump through, you're less likely to even participate at all, and you're still suffering. Parents believe that navigating open enrollment can be tricky and warrants some extra help throughout the process. And so in some areas, parents recognize open enrollment is not being implemented as intended because of the autonomy of school districts. So that's all I had. I think we're going to do our next section. Thank you, guys.
you so much for the insightful data presentations, both from Shayna and from Dory. I know that folks have had some time to digest and probably are still digesting the data that was presented. So this will be an opportunity for to gain some deeper insight into Dory and Shayna's journey to this work. And we'll then open it up for questions from the audience. So can you tell me a little bit, Mrs. Burrow, about your journey to Learning Heroes and to EdChoice?
Sure, I go first. So I have been at EdChoice for a little over 2 years now. This is my first big girl job, I like to say, out of school. And so I always knew, I got my degree in public relations, and I always knew I wanted to work in a nonprofit. And so I'm excited that I got to, my first job was in that area. How I kind of came to, or like my school choice story, or however you want to categorize it, my parents, I have an older brother, and so I feel like oftentimes whatever the older sibling does, the younger one kind of just follows with that and hopefully works out. But my parents sent my brother to public school that was like right down the road from our house, and they just weren't happy with the education that he was receiving, so they decided to send him to a private school that was about 20 minutes away. And private school tuition is super expensive, and I wish that my parents would have known that they did have different options to help us pay for, well, help them pay for his education and then mine as well. Because they had to, there was multiple times when they had to get multiple jobs, and Christmases were not as full and things like that. And of course, they didn't let us know any of that. They just handled business and whatnot. But I just wish that they would have been able to know the different options that they had. So I'm working towards making sure that all families have that option to send their student to whatever type of learning environment is best for them.
Thank you, Dory. I love Dory. I just met her a few weeks ago. When we learned we collaborate, it's been a joy to work with her. So I'm a little older than Dory, so I've had a little different experience. As I said, I'm in Baltimore City Public Schools. I'm a product of Baltimore City Public Schools. And most recently, before coming to Learning Heroes, I led family community engagement for that district. I also have been the point person for the community school strategy there. I've led community partnerships. What else? A few roles at the district level, but I've also been a second grade teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools. I taught in a school in the community where I grew up, which was a joy. I am a Baltimore girl in every sense of the word. I love my city. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to assume the roles that I had when I was there in the district and working in schools, and a few experiences in some other nonprofits when implementing the community school strategy. What brings me here to Learning Heroes? What I was doing in Baltimore City, I was eager to take it to a broader platform and work with leaders all around the nation. I know that this is something that many educators and leaders, this being family community engagement, is something that many educators and leaders share that they haven't had any formal training in. So it is my pleasure to share some of the practices that worked well for us with others.
Thank you. So why did you engage stakeholders in the focus groups and in the research that you presented?
I think that a lot of times, it's interesting that parents are supposed to just give their kids over to these schools and then expect or they're not supposed to have their input or share what they want to change or anything like that. So we wanted to change that, and first of all, let people know and reassure people that they absolutely should be sharing how they're feeling about what they like, what they don't like, what's working, what's not working, and also including their students in that conversation as well. But we wanted to include specifically Black and brown voices, because even more so, we're not included in the conversation, and our kids are just as valuable as anybody else. And so we wanted to make sure that those opinions were heard, and again, that people could know that they have options if they wanted to opt out, as the lady said yesterday, and that's fine.
Thank you. Well, engaging stakeholders isn't a new practice for Learning Heroes, and I'm so happy it isn't, because it's a practice that I use in Baltimore City Public Schools. Like, we can't make decisions for families and even educators that around things that impact them. So I am appreciative of the ongoing opportunities for stakeholder feedback that my organization has, because it's a practice that I implemented. It was something that we did in Baltimore City Public Schools right outside of the pandemic. Each quarter we engaged families, and once we returned to schools, it was a standard practice to regularly engage families and hear from them, not just through surveys, through text messaging polls, through focus groups, through empathy interviews. So I just think that it's a must that we get the insight from those that we are aiming to support, because we don't want to do two, we want to do with.
Thank you. So let me stick with you for a little bit, Shane.
Okay.
So we heard about the Gallup data that you presented, but it's important to note that although this issue is getting a lot of attention, it's not a new issue. Is it?
No, it isn't. So Learning Heroes uncovered the disconnect in 2016, and it likely existed prior to that. So while the narrative is pretty much the same, there are some new insights. And so the reason that I think that we believe that this recent research is garnering so much attention from media, national media, and so forth, are a couple of reasons. One, the pandemic. Millions of students were, sent home when schools closed. And I don't need to tell anybody in this room the impact that had on education overall, and the impact that it will likely have, the damage that it will do to American education. So I think that that is one reason that the latest research results are so important. I'd also say, because we have solutions now, right? This research is very solution oriented. And so now that we know, we have an idea of this disconnect, we understand it, we hope to make families aware of this disconnect and inform them with the information they need to get a real understanding of their child's progress. We also know we have an idea of what works. So I think this is a time for us to be very intentional about fixing the situation.
So we can do a lot of finger pointing, right? There's a call to action, I think is what I'm hearing from what you're saying.
Absolutely.
To kind of bring awareness and encourage families to go beyond the grades and to go beyond the report cards.
Absolutely.
How do we prevent the blame game?
Put children first. The adults in the home and the adults in the schoolhouse, putting children first and prioritizing our future. That's how I think we avoid the blame game. I haven't met a parent who didn't want what's best for their child. And I'm of the belief that most educators, the majority of educators, want what's best for children, right? But everybody needs a little help, right? Parents don't want to be clueless. Parents want to know the real. They want to know the real deal. Parents want to know how they can help, because many don't. If you weren't, a lot of parents weren't educators. I was an educator before, and I'm a GG now of a second grader. I don't always understand her math, so I'm reaching out to Ms. K and saying, hey, we want to be able to help at home. So parents need support in that way. They have funds of knowledge that need to be tapped into, and they can do this work, they can partner. But also teachers need a little help when it comes to these authentic relationships that I spoke of, and ensuring that they are robust and instrumental in supporting student learning. Teachers have told me, so in Baltimore City, I did a pilot where, because initially, we've come a long way, you all, and in that district, family community engagement wasn't prioritized in systemic professional learning cycles, right? But we did some work, some advocacy, and so forth, and now it is standardized. I'm happy to say that before I left, each quarter there's a family and community engagement learning opportunity that's offered on systemic professional development days. It is the most popular, well, last year when we first implemented, it was the most popular offering. So that says that teachers want to know. They're not against engaging families. And so we stood up a pilot where we got some funding from the state to offer stipends for teachers, and so they were, for a few months we brought them together to learn from them and also to build their capacity. What I learned from teachers is that, you know, somewhere I'm very honest, I'm afraid. You know, I have skills, and my strong suit is working with babies, educating young people. I don't necessarily know how to build relationships and engage with their parents around what we're doing. Some even said at the start of that opportunity, I don't think we have to. Like, they were honest. They didn't necessarily believe that family and community engagement could be an instructional strategy. So we had some work to do. I bring that up to share that there are things that teachers need as well. Teachers need training. Teachers need resources. Some of those teachers that were in that pilot said to me and my colleagues, well, if you tell me what to say, if you give it to me, you know, as a district support, then I'll use it. So we build their capacity, give them the resources, they'd be happy to engage families because they weren't afraid anymore. And so what I'm attempting to call out is that parents want what's best, teachers want what's best, and all need a little help, right? Need to support, and that's why it's so important that they have authentic relationships with one another so that they can say what they need, acknowledge their biases, right? Call them out and work together for the betterment of our young people. So I think that's how we avoid the blame game, just recognizing that everybody needs help.
All right, so I have one last question before I turn. When parents and caregivers are more aware of the ways to assess their students' progress, then what?
Well, similar to my response in the previous question, then they team up with their schools. Once they become aware, they're armed with the reality of the report card may not be, you know, is not the only way to understand a child's grade level mastery, then they team up, right? And the schoolhouse has to be ready for that. And so parents and teachers working together, meeting regularly. So often school districts and schools have a beginning of the year meeting of some type, right? We gotta go beyond that. That's cool to kick off the relationship, but to sustain that, there needs to be ongoing communication and contact, right? Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of things like dojo, class dojo, right? That's one way. Home visiting is another way. And so I don't necessarily know if a parent would invite, but they may invite a teacher into their home. But these are things of the strategies or practices that I'm recommending. It takes two to tango, right? So the parent and the teachers need to be willing to engage in this way. So I say once families know, then they need to ask. If the teacher isn't asking you as a parent to engage, to connect, to talk about your child's progress, then the parent needs to be asking for those opportunities, right? At Learning Heroes, if you go to bealearninghero.org, there are a host of different resources for educators and parents, right? There's a Dear Teacher letter, a template where parents can just drop the unique information of their student and their family into the letter, download it, and send it to the teacher. What does this do? This helps, again, to kick off or maybe even sustain, if it's already started, the relationship and ongoing communication with their teacher. It helps the teacher understand the unique dynamics of their family. But there are lots of different tools online. And lastly, I would say parents should connect with other parents. There's some really awesome parent organizations, advocacy groups out there that could help. And there's always power in numbers. So while parents may initially join to, you know, they have an issue like their child performed below grade level and they don't know what to do, they're out there in those types of community they can learn. And it's kind of like eating, what is it, 2 scones, I don't want to say killing 2 birds, we don't say that anymore. But you get what I'm saying, you get 2, there's a bonus, right? Because once you join, say, communities, right, there's also opportunity to lift your voice around other decisions that impact your child beyond your specific individual need.
Thank you. I have a few questions. Where do you see the future of K-12 education going?
I think K-12 education will be more freedom in a lot of different ways. More freedom for parents and families to decide if they want to keep going with a traditional public school or if they want to do a different option, micro schools, homeschooling, hybrid schooling, something we haven't thought of yet. So we're really big also at Edgeways on education entrepreneurship and people who are just deciding that they want to make a change and they want to be the change. And so we're trying to support those individuals as well. I think it'll be like a choose your own adventure kind of book. And people can opt in and opt out and have that be like a fluid kind of process and not so rigid. I think it'll look like teachers having more say as well. I'm excited about that. And the collaboration between teachers and families and students all together. And so I think, yeah, that's going to be, I'm excited to see where the future of education is going to go. And having students take even more of an active role in their education as well and not just being told this is what you're going to do, but them speaking up and feeling empowered to do so as well. So I think I'm excited about yesterday when the 2 young men were speaking to us. That got me super excited because first of all, they were fantastic and so smart. And I was like, I was not talking like that at their age. But so I'm excited to have younger advocates because they are advocates in this work as well. So I'm excited for younger advocates, people who may not have children of their own, but it's the community that's helping raise all the babies. So I'm excited for everybody to feel like they do have a place because they do.
So one of the things that you mentioned in your presentation is that a lot of parents don't really understand micro schools. I know like during the pandemic, we talked a lot about learning pods and there was also some equity issues around that. Can you demystify what micro schools are?
Yes, so I mean, learning pods basically are the same kind of concept. It's fewer than 15 students and you can be in somebody's house, in a church, in a community center, in a library. So the location is not the most important, it's just the smaller class size so that students can have more personalized education. They don't have to feel like they have to hurry up and rush through subjects and try to memorize it just to take the test and then it goes out of their brain, because I feel like that happens to a lot of students. But they can actually master the subjects and feel good about like moving on to the next thing. But also going at their own pace as well. I think that's an important thing that just education in general should focus on as well, but micro schools give that option a little bit easier. But yeah, I think people don't know about it because, like you said, the equity issues that they're still trying to work out, but they are just like, how are we going to do this? Like, who's going to do it? I don't want to be the teacher of like 15 kids and I still have to go to work or whatever the situation may be. So I think it's an issue of not knowing how to access it, not knowing how to start one, or try to find somebody who you trust with your most valuable thing. And so, yeah, I think that's what is the mystical part of micro schools, but they're just another option for school choice, and they're a really great option for a lot of families.
Thank you. So now I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Serena. Brenda Ferrier. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm a homeschool mom of 2 and also the creator and facilitator for a program called Detroit Discovers, where we do community-based activities for homeschoolers in grade levels, pre-K through 3rd grade. So Dory, my question and statement is for you. First, I want to start off as a homeschool mom, I appreciate the data that you captured about homeschool education from homeschool educators in terms of it being a choice, benefits, some of the concerns. I have 2 questions though. My first question is, as Ed Choice looks to talking about educational choice and educational freedom, how are you capturing how could homeschool be an option? I think a lot of times when we have conversations about educational choice, is conversations about what does it look like to go from public school, private school, charter school even, but some of the things you're talking about in terms of homeschooling, learning pods, micro schools often do not come up in school choice conversations, especially for Black and brown families. So how are you marketing that as a true choice for families? And my second question is, you talked about Ed Choice being able to support educational entrepreneurs. So as an educational entrepreneur, I would love to hear more about what sort of commitments the organization is doing to support that.
Yeah, so first question about micro schools, or excuse me, homeschooling. We do a lot of public opinion research and polling, and we do one every month, and then we do kind of specialized ones for teachers, teenagers, and we did, like my presentation, Black parents and parents of color specifically. But we actually we ask about homeschooling in our polling every single month, and especially after the pandemic, and the numbers have been pretty consistent even afterwards. But parents became educational entrepreneurs for themselves, and they are self-identifying as homeschooling parents and whatnot. So we're capturing those numbers. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's millions of students who are deciding to be homeschooled. And yeah, as you know, but yeah, so we are capturing those students as well. The number can't be the most accurate because, like you said, it's not like a traditional public school or private school where attendance is taken and whatnot, but we are trying to capture those numbers. Second question was about educational entrepreneurs and how we're going to support them. So we are in our second iteration of our educational entrepreneurship developer. It's I think 10-week accelerator program basically. And so we're helping people who, you have to apply, we go through all that, and then we're helping people kind of in the first stages of creating whatever their product is. It might not be that you want to open up a school, it might be that you want to create an app or a program or something like that. So we're in the stage 1 of that and helping people to kind of just get through the ideation phase. Is this a good idea? Is this sustainable? Is there a market for it? That kind of thing. So we're doing that.
Thank you.
Good morning. I sat there and I was a little triggered every time you say micro schools.
Okay.
For several reasons. I think I do agree that micro schools can be an amazing choice if it's owned by us, for us, and the resources are coming to us. Prenda is one of the biggest micro schools organizations, but it's the most problematic thing I've ever saw in the United States of America when it comes to education. So when I hear you say that, I think there needs to be a cautionary tale. Because you look at New Orleans public schools, Prenda was the first one in predatory, destroying a whole school district and everything. The school district will probably never look the same. Then you move to a place where I live, Arizona. Prenda comes in as the white savior again and say, hey, we see you have this Black Mothers Forum that's doing whatever, ya. You can look up micro schools right now. The first thing you're gonna see is Black Mothers Forum Arizona. when Black Mothers Forum got sued, Prenda said, we're not your school. We don't support you. But everything they used was from Prenda. They got left hung out to dry. So when I hear micro schools, I think we in our community, because it's something new, don't actually know the cautionary tale about being exploited by a system, because we're like, okay, let's rescue, you know, we need to get out of the public school system, we need to take our kids out of there, but you don't want to actually change slave owners if that's what you're trying to do. So when I listen to micro schools, it is so important that when we put this information out as something that's a great option, we need to know, we need to actually have the control. Just like we're saying, if we get money from the state, we want to take control and do what we need to do with our kids. As these ladies are talking about homeschooling and what you do with your kids, we actually want to make the choices. But there's, in Atlanta, there's VIA, because I actually took a lot of time to study across the state as just my own thing, because I saw what was happening to my people, where I'm originally from and born and raised. I'm like, what in the world is going on? And people are like, well, the school districts aren't doing a great job. But micro schools, again, we have to get to resources that are actually doing a good job and that where we retain ownership. So that's the cautionary thing, is I see all of these Black people here listening and saying, oh, okay, well, maybe we need to do this and go to where they have that. But I'm telling you, Prenda and all of these places that we have no ownership in it is not for us, not by us, not with us. It's another way to exploit education. So and what happens to us. So as I listened to all this, I was just triggered, had to put that out there and want to know how can your organization actually help. I mean, it's like you don't want to defame and do all that, but I'm like, I'm an exposure person. I'm like, no. This is not what we're about to do with all these Black people listening and, you know, doing the clap it up for micro schools. Because like I said, in Atlanta, Mia's doing great. But they took and made their own thing. They didn't actually go to somebody else who had this resource and say, oh, let's get all of this, and then realize we don't own anything, none of it. And we're just hung out to dry again. So I guess I don't know how we do both. I don't think it's important. It's important that we know all of the resources, but we actually know alert and a caution that goes with it.
So I have two questions as well. My first question is a follow-up from what the conversation I think Sarita was starting. And so my question is specifically for Ed Choice in particular, do you all, I hear somewhat of an accelerator course to develop educational entrepreneurs, is that correct?
Yes.
So is there funding opportunities for existing educational entrepreneurs who really don't need help coming up with an idea? They already have an idea.
So we don't do the funding part of it. There are other organizations, I think, Step Up for Kids does funding, and so we're partners in the movement with them as well. So those are partnerships that we're trying to keep cultivating and whatnot, but we just don't handle the funding part.
Okay, the partnerships is excellent, so thank you, and I'll look up that. You wrote it down, cool. Okay, my next question though is, so I've heard two different statements, if I'm correct, about the good grades. Good grades are deceiving. So one perspective is good grades are not the only indicator for a student's success or their aptitude. But then the other line of thought that I've heard is that essentially the grades are not a reflection of. So it's one thing to say that they're not a reflection of what the child can do or is achieving, and then they're not the only indicator. So addressing they're not a reflection of, in this conversation that let's go beyond the grades, I'm just wondering why has it come up that we just need to start giving bad grades to these children?
who are not achieving. And I'm not trying to start a fire, but I'm saying if what I see on my child's report card is not a reflection of what they're doing, at what point do we start reflecting what they're actually doing so we can have the real conversation about how to get them where they need to be? Because I have an issue or a concern that you felt comfortable to give my child a B, but now you want to tell me that it was a placeholder.
So I'll take that one. What's your name again?
Victoria.
Victoria, you bring up a great point. And Victoria, I'm all for the uncomfortable conversation because I've experienced them personally. I was an educator, I was a second grade teacher. And at the time, I was a district leader when my daughter experienced this. She was in the 11th grade and some new advisor met with her and told her that she was not on schedule to graduate on time. Mommy and daddy get hyper vigilant at this point. What? Like we are on the PTA, I am rather, on the PTA, I'm with the school family councils, I'm at the school for every parent-teacher conference. How is this possible? Right, so I have been in that situation myself. So I want to share that personal experience, and it is not okay. And while I was angry and wanted everybody to answer for it at the time, I did what I recommended earlier when Adenike asked the question. I had to pause for a minute. Okay, at this point, what needs to happen so that my baby can move on and be successful? Didn't forget about what had already happened, but at this point I needed to make sure that she was successful. And so what I did was ask the principal to pull in the educators, pull in the counselors or whatever, pull in my daughter because she has to have some ownership in this process as well. And so what we did, we sat down, we created a plan, and in that plan everybody had a role, right? And everybody was able to hold everyone else accountable. I know that all parents don't have that type of access, right? Because I could pick the phone up and call the principal, but it's still, I share that experience to say, while I was an educator, I worked for the district, this, happened, my perception of how she was doing wasn't well. My God, she played basketball. And I say that because you have to have good grades to play high school varsity basketball. So we were of the assumption that she was doing well. And what I learned was a little of two things, right? One is that I felt like, and this is my personal experience, the educator was giving some grace because my child was in school every day. She showed up well, she participated, she did all the projects, right? And so that gets into the report card grade. It was not just about her grade level mastery. It wasn't just about standardized tests. It was about, she did all the work, right? She did all the projects, she showed up, she participated. And so I guess for me, I had to give the educator some grace because she was able to show me classwork where she did those things. But what the problem was, and I'm sure it's what others are experiencing in this space of deflation, is that what she was showing me wasn't enough. It wasn't the and all. I did not see standardized tests. That never even came up. So I'm just sharing my personal experience to say that I do feel like in some cases, educators are, especially after the pandemic, are thinking that they're showing students some grace by giving them these grades, and so that is something that definitely needs to be addressed. But on the other hand, on the other note of just considering all things, report cards aren't the only thing that families should look at. We definitely should look at them. We definitely should have our finger on the pulse of how involved our child is and how engaged they are in learning. But it's just not the only thing.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Shikundi Salisbury. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I'm with 100 Black Parents, which is a community partner of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. My question is, in your research, have you come across entities or groups of parents? You spoke about micro schools and other alternatives, and I'm just wondering if you've come across groups that are running their own Saturday schools and other educational opportunities. I came across this. My mother was raised in Jacksonville, Florida, and there was a link where a bunch of parents in Florida have got together and they were asking for books and donations for their Saturday school. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you're finding prevalent, or is that a one-off, especially in the DeSantis era and in this anti-education era? Thank you.
Thank you. We haven't specifically asked any polling about Saturday schooling or anything like that. We're always open to getting audience feedback and incorporating some like new questions into our polling. So I will definitely ask them about that. I don't think it's a one-off because people and families have been educating their kids in 100 different ways since the beginning of time. So I don't think it is a one-off. I feel very confident that there are a lot of families and other community organizations that are doing kind of like supplemental learning, I would call that. But we just haven't researched them specifically yet, but that is interesting.
Hello, my name is Alexis Lavelle. I come from Louisville, Kentucky. I work in the Youth Development Education Department there, but I'm also a former teacher. So one thing that I hated coming out the gate is putting a grade on a report card, and it didn't give the full scale of the kid, right? So midway through the semester, I would do a progress report, and I literally listed the skills that we went over and where they were with the skills. But then I'll have to still give this kid, and it was elementary school, so I still would have to say they're satisfactory, needs improvement, and it never captured where the kid was. This has been my biggest caveat about teaching, public school system, helping parents understand where they is. So I love the work that you're doing because I was like, I've been thinking about this ever since I started. So I'm wondering where are skill-based reporting? I had my godson went to a private school, and I looked at, it was my first year teaching kindergarten, and his kindergarten report card and what I had to put together was two different things. It was this skill-based report card, and I'm wondering what's the research around it? Are there school districts that do it? What does that look like? And how can that be pushed on a larger scale? Because if a parent knew, oh, my kid needs improvement because there's 10 different reading skills that my kid doesn't have, I can understand why my kid is this level, this low, whatever, instead of saying, oh, but she's so cute and she's so good and she sits in the back of the classroom and does all of her worksheets, so I'm going to give her satisfactory. That just, it never sat right with me, and so I just.
Thank you for that question. A couple things come to mind for me. Thinking about what you said at the start of your comment or question, you said, I never like putting a grade on report cards. And throughout the time that I have been reviewing the research and data from the Gallup research, I've been thinking about how as a Black parent and my parents and ancestors, right, we were taught that grades were everything. It's just what we were taught, right? We were also taught to, respect authority, and the schoolhouse was the authority, right? So we didn't question it. That's why it's very hard to connect, right, with this thought of our perception isn't real. It's there, it's on paper, right? And that's why it's so important to bring awareness to families, parents and caregivers now to look beyond the report card. I love what you said about skills-based reporting. I'm not as familiar with that, but I do have an example of something that we're doing. As I mentioned, we provide professional development around family and community engagement for educators as well, not just principals and district leaders. And we're working with a school district right now focusing on parent-teacher conferences and how to make those as robust as possible, and not just to talk about, oh, and here's some artwork and here's some fun stuff that your child did that has smiley faces on them, to go beyond the report card grade and actually look at, so for instance, across grade bands, like what is the milestone? What is it that we want children to achieve by the end of the year? And making sure that every touch and every contact with parents, that we are communicating that. And that's why not only it has to go beyond the report card, the engagement with families and families with teachers, we need to be engaging regularly, right? There needs to be conversations around how your child is doing. I have a perfect example. Again, I said I'm a GD. My granddaughter's in 2nd grade, and so I joined her parent-teacher conference, and the teacher did a good job because I got my eye on her and I'm waiting to see, but she actually went through the skills that Zori is her name, should master by a certain point, not just the end of the year, and what she's doing to make sure that she gets there. She also had strategies for me, without knowing anything about me or what I did. She had strategies for me in ways in which that her parents and I could help her at home. So that's one way I think educators can support families with focusing and honing in on specific skills, right? And families need to know to ask those questions as well. That's why it's important that, this Go Beyond Grades campaign is huge, because we need to make sure, bring that awareness. I go back to what I said at the start. Most families think if it's on the report card, it's gone. It is what it is, and we know that that is not the case, so we need to bring awareness to that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question, so I also have a comment as well, so I want to try to challenge everyone to take action when they leave from here. Jason B. Allen, I'm from the National Parents Union, a longtime educator. And I also come from a family of educators and organizers. So I'm curious about this as we're talking about parents and policies. For those who may not know, parent liaisons or parent coordinators are the lowest paid in school districts across this nation. I believe that this is a room full of parents who are organizing and advocating for their children. So curious about thoughts on how are we prioritizing family engagement, which a lot of the partners of all of our organizations are focused on that. How are we prioritizing this when parent liaisons and coordinators are the lowest paid in school districts, and it's often disenfranchising them from being able to gain the very access that we're talking about today?
I'll take that first. Thank you for your comments and your question. First of all, family and community engagement has to be viewed as an instructional strategy. It cannot be viewed as just something good to do. I mentioned in my presentation earlier that families have funds of knowledge. Every last parent has something to offer their child, whether it's the connection to other family members or other connectors in the community that can help. They want what's best for their child, and they want to help. So that's the first thing. Schools, school districts need to have policies around family and community engagement that mandate school leaders to create the appropriate infrastructure for family and community engagement, whether that is appropriately compensating family and community engagement liaisons or compensating teachers who take on those extra roles to do that, allocating funds to build capacity around family and community engagement, because as I said earlier, many teachers will tell you, I didn't learn this in undergrad or in graduate school. This isn't a topic that I had a lot of grounding in. So I would say the way in which leaders, school district leaders, as well as school leaders show that they're ready and bought into the belief that family community engagement is an instructional strategy is the infrastructure, making sure that there's a team of folks, not just an individual that owns family and community engagement, some type of action team, whatever you want to call it. There is a subset of the school, a group that represents all of the various stakeholders in the school community that is dedicated to family and community engagement. And as I mentioned, there needs to be policies and standards around family and community engagement. I'm trying to think because I know we need to wrap up, but the professional development is huge. We need to make sure that teachers, as well as leaders, and families, because families need their muscle built around how to partner, but we need to prioritize capacity building as well. So properly allocating funding to make sure that all of that happens is huge, it's very important. And for school districts that have Title I funds, funding streams coming through. Like, it is a mandate that 1% of that allocation is used for family and community engagement. So if it's not happening, it should be.
At least 1%.
Yep, at least. Thank you, sir, because I always ask for above the 1%.
I'll quickly add, so EdChoice just launched our Parent Corps Coalition, and so that is trying to, our goal is to help parents from across the country have a safe space to talk about ideas, to talk about their frustrations, but also talk about like solutions and things that they can bring back to their own states and in their own communities as well. So that's something that EdChoice is doing to help boost and cultivate parent engagement, family engagement.
All right, well, thank you for engaging with this panel. I'd like to thank again Shana McIver from Learning Heroes and Dory McCarroll from EdChoice. And yeah, we're on to the next one. Thanks again, everyone.
Yes, keep the applause going, ladies. You all did an amazing job. And we thank you for the information you shared with us today. Yes. One thing I want to do is make sure that we stay connected, so I'm going to give you their websites again. So bealearninghero.org. I see some hands moving, so I'm going to say it again. bealearninghero.org is one of the resources that we can use for our learning heroes. And the speaker was Ms. Shana. And then also, yes, thank you. And then with Ms. Dory represents EdChoice, and that website is gobeyondgrades.org. I'm sorry. EdChoice.org. Excuse me, I got that incorrect. EdChoice.org. Okay, so I'm an interactive individual, so I enjoyed the passion that is in this room. I continue to enjoy it. It's kind of infectious. So I believe in a call or response. So I'm going to ask you all to repeat after me. Say, I will, connect. I will, collaborate. You guys, the challenge is for us to do both of those things to affect the change in education.
For those of you in the hallway, I would like for you all to come join us. Please and thank you. Yes. Now you run out of church and like, come on, the usher's about to close the doors. Yes. All right. So for our next panel, we will hear from policymakers about policy progress and the importance of caregivers in that process. They'll also explore school funding and the current issues. We would like to welcome our moderator, Ms. Kendra Reeves, the Senior Director of Data Analytics at the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio. And here she is. Thank you, Ms. Kendra.
Thank you so much, Renee. I'm so honored to be here today to have this conversation. I'm going to invite our panelists to come on. Bishop Michael Dantley, who is an educator here in Cincinnati. Mike Moroff, who is the Cincinnati Public Schools Board member and Policy Committee Chair, and Ohio State Representative Debbie Isaacson from District 24. So for the folks who are watching live on the streaming, please drop your questions in the chat. We will be grabbing those in our Q&A. So make sure you do that throughout this conversation. So I just want to start by talking about why BCN was created, which is the Black Caregivers Network. And it was really to equip our caregivers to be connected with policymakers. So how have you collaborated with caregivers in your role, and how has that partnership been fulfilled? Anyone can go.
Well, I can honestly say that setting policy has been something that has been strong on my mind as an educator, also as a pastor. And how do we make certain that our members understand the importance of setting policy, especially education policy. So having opportunities to talk with caregivers, having opportunities to talk with parents in my congregation, and stressing to them how important it is for us to be involved in education, especially educational policy. That's been one of the things that I've been trying to do with the people in my congregation. So, and I find that congregation, my people in my congregation, that's a captive audience for me. And so we really, really do try to stress, I do, my wife is also an educator, we try to stress the vital importance of being a part at the table to set policy. Hope that makes sense.
So, first of all, thank you for having us. Excited to be here. It's a good segue into sort of my answer to this question, which is actually more about the role I had previously. So I'm in my first term, so only been doing this one for 11 months. But before this, I started and ran a community engagement organization called Cohere. And the premise of the work was that people who live the issues every day, parents of kids who are getting bullied, seniors who ride the bus, people struggling to pay their rent, are experts on that issue, and that the everyday experts need to be at the table with policymakers. So I spent 6 years facilitating discussions, really policy focus groups between policymakers and those everyday experts. And one of the core areas of focus for us was working with Cincinnati Public. It's actually how I got to know Mike. And connecting students and parents to decision makers in the district, both elected and administrative, so superintendent and deputy superintendents. And we ran for years a parent advisory board for the superintendent's office. So really made sure that parents were at the table advising and giving not just their feedback on what the district was doing, but actually being the source and generating ideas based on their experience. So honestly, a lot of that is why I decided to run for the legislature in the first place, because when you sit down and have those conversations, not just with parents about education, but certainly including that, and you ask them what's going to make a huge difference in your life, and if you're a parent and your kid is struggling with mental health issues, or you're worried about them doing self-harm, kind of nothing else matters. Right, so everything else goes away, and when you ask them what would make a difference, so often their answers are not obviously partisan in the way that we understand partisanship. So I ran for the legislature in part based on what I heard from parents, which is that the things that they need are not fitting into one Democratic or Republican lane, and so I ran thinking maybe we could bring some of that creative thinking to policymaking in the legislature. And it's only 11 months in, but so far, I actually think those parents are basically right.
Thank you for the question, and thank you all so much for having me. So as we said in the introduction, I am on the CPS school board. I've been the policy chair for the district for 4 years. In that time, I think we've done some great stuff, and we've only been able to do it because of having parents, caregivers, and families at the table. But if I may also, my real job, I'm the Executive Director of the Human Services Chamber of Hamilton County, of which Urban League is a member, so grateful for your membership. And the only reason I bring that up is because my job in that capacity is largely to be the local lobbyist to the city government and county government on the shared needs of our sector that's been tasked with impossible tasks of trying to make the community more equitable, just, et cetera. And so the lens that I take to both of those roles in response to the question, they're really, in my brain, there are two methods of garnering caregiver, family, and community input. One is institutional and one is personal. The institutional one doesn't work so good. We send a lot of surveys at CPS, my apologies. You get beaten over the heads, we want your feedback. Surveys are all right. I think we've gotten a little better at them. They've gotten a little more representative, I think, of our community. But that personal one-on-one, and not to fluff my state rep too much, but he did a real awesome job with Cohere, and they still do an awesome job. And I'm happy that my state rep is somebody who used to ask me to go sit in cafeterias with families late at night so they could tell me all the terrible things going on at CPS that we were then able to try to address. So that's pretty great. Vote for Dunny. I think that personal one, though, is the key, and it's especially important for someone like me who's the most privileged demographic in this country, a white straight male, to make sure that I not only garner the input, but that I have people who don't look like me at the table, to use Dunny's phrase, but also going with me to ask for change at, say, like the city level, right, or the state level with people like Dunny. All too often, and I learned this, I did some work at Cradle Cincinnati with Queens Village for a number of years at Children's, and I'm probably the least qualified person in the world to work on Black maternal health issues for multiple obvious reasons. And I was fortunate, though, that I have so many friends, like Dr. Meredith Shockley-Smith, Jasmine Coaston, who's now here at the Urban League, and different people to walk me through some training with Dr. Nicole Yvonne at UC and learn about implicit bias. Like, oh, I'm 45, I think I'm a pretty open-minded dude, to realize, oh, geez, maybe I'm not. And how can I do this job better? And the one thing I took away, not to get too personal with it, but it's how I go about my job. The biggest thing I took away was I was doing maybe an okay job at listening and trying to understand, but I wasn't doing a good job as far as making sure people who the policies or the lobbying efforts were intended to help were actually there with me. Because, you know, not to speak on behalf of all white guys, but we have this thing in our brain where we see point A and point B and we just want to get to point B. And, you know, it's real easy and tempting to be like, well, I'm just going to go do that. And that's not the right way to do it. So I think, again, the biggest lesson for me has been to slow down and to make sure that people are with along the journey, not just going and sitting in the living room and listening to the issues and how to affect the policies is important, but making sure people are there the whole time is maybe the most important thing, at least that I've learned.
So you all touched on trying to bridge the gap between community and policymaking, but some of the caregivers that we've spoken with told us that policymakers feel inaccessible. So how do you close the gap?
I mean, I think part of it is showing up and responsiveness, right? And that I think manifests in a bunch of different ways. So some of it is literally being responsive when someone reaches out to you, responding to them. And so in our office, we sort of have a hierarchy. If someone reaches out who's not a constituent using a form letter, they get a response, but it's more of a form response. If someone reaches out to the office who is a constituent using a form letter, they will get a direct response. And if someone is a constituent who reaches out in a personal way, they will get either a note back or a phone call or a text to respond to their personal question. But I think that's actually just a piece of it, because when you show up to events, when you show up in the community, I have way more interactions about policy, and I answer people's questions when I'm just at a holiday party, when I'm, you know, at I was at the sort of housing group that does affordable housing at a Thanksgiving potluck 2 weeks ago. So I was there sort of helping serve the food and hang out and play cards with people, and I must have spoken to 5 sets of parents about what's going on in their schools. Right? And so by showing up to that event that had nothing to do with school, nothing to do with education or their kids' experiences, that's when we got to engage. And that happens at almost every event I go to, especially when I say what committees I work on. Which reminds me, I should have shared with this group what committees I'm on, particularly as it relates to this issue. So the ones that don't relate to this issue directly, I'm on Ways and Means, which is the tax committee. I'm on government oversight, which mostly does controversial bills, a lot of them related to gun issues. As far as I'm concerned, going in the wrong direction. And then, most relevant to this, I'm on the finance committee that sets the state's budget, and I am the ranking member, the lead Democrat on the education subcommittee there, so the committee that does school funding.
So, as far as closing the gap, I feel the onus or the answer to that is really on people like us that are charged with making policy decisions. And I think Rev. Isaacson did a good job of explaining how just showing up to things is a big part of it. So really the onus is on, we make ourselves inaccessible. You can't even find my email address on the CPS website. We've asked to change that. It's never changed. I'm not blaming anybody at CPS, but the fact of the matter is, unless you know me, Mike Borowski at Gmail, and now you know it. I am my personal one. So my name should, if it's in something here, that at gmail.com. We make it hard to find us. So I think that's the biggest part of it, honestly, and that would be, I would rather have that conversation with a room full of people that are tasked with making policy decisions about how they could do a better job, potentially, of not making themselves so inaccessible. But I think for parents, and I think Dunny said it well, what I would add for my piece is regarding the school district specifically. If nobody's ever told you this, I'll tell you, and I know Dunny would probably agree with me, and same with Reverend Danley. People that make policy are not smarter than you, and they don't know more than you do at all. They might be an expert at one thing, if you're lucky. Most of them aren't an expert at anything. But if they are an expert at one thing, they're probably not an expert at what you're an expert at. And so when you're reaching out, I get a lot of emails and a lot of texts, et cetera, and I take them all seriously. And the ones that are absolutely taken the most serious, though, are the ones that are also presenting some sort of potential solution, even if it's impossible. I would rather start from a place with an impossible solution and then get to something that's workable than someone who just saying, I think this sucks. That's important too, and I take that seriously as well, but that would be the only thing I'd add, I think, to what Dunny said. It's just some potential solution, as crazy as it might sound. It's something to start with.
So caregivers have also shared that the transition to higher ed can be daunting, and parents don't know how to advocate for adult students. So Bishop Dantley, based on your experience, can you share how parents or caregivers can plug in? And then Mike, for you, how can parents prepare their kids for the transition to high school?
That's a great question, and I appreciate it. I spent most of my adult life in higher education at Miami University, and also I was dean of the School of Education at Loyola University of Chicago, and then came back and became dean at Miami University's College of Education, Health, and Society. One of the things that I would strongly recommend to all parents, all caregivers, is that if, for instance, and Mike can talk about this more, if, for instance, the high school that your students are attending, if they have a college fair, go to it. Attend that college fair. And let me say simply that no question is a ridiculous question, not one. All of them are very, very important questions. So I would go to those college fairs, and I would have a set of questions that you will ask the person that's representing the university. And again, I need to tell you, no question is a ridiculous question. Ask whatever is on your mind. For instance, ask about the tuition and the room and board. Ask about what is it that the university or the college is looking for their interim freshmen. What's the GPA they're looking for? And now, many of the colleges and universities are not even using standardized tests, the ACT or the SAT, to get in. But you still want to find out what are the criteria for students to get into the university. Are they looking for extracurricular activities? And if so, what are those? What kinds of things are they looking for? Are they looking for service opportunities where young people have gone out in the community and they've done service activities? Find out all that stuff. Now, the other thing I was thinking about this question is, if the student is a first-gen student, and that student is the first one in the family to go to college, ask if the college or the university has special services for first-gen students. Find out if that is there. I know at Miami does have a special program for first-gen students, and then we have to encourage our students to take advantage of those services. Also find out, because I don't care if you're first-gen or not, oftentimes going to college and you are leaving home, that comes with stress and trauma. My grandson, I hope, this is going across the world. My older grandson is in his freshman year at Miami University, and that's just 45 minutes north of here. And I'm telling you, he talks about being homesick, and sometimes he comes home to get his hair cut, And we're like, you're not really getting this whole notion of being away from home. But it comes, yeah, right. I am going to get in great trouble. I don't think my daughter's watching this. I am going to get in serious, serious trouble. But going away to college can be very stressful. There's positive stress and negative stress. And sometimes these young people, and I don't know how many of us have been to college, but I know when I went, well, a long time ago, when I went and had independence away from my mother and my father, I'm telling you, I had to come to grips quickly with what's in my best interest and what isn't. And that didn't come easily. That came through making mistakes, failing at some things, and having to regroup. So the bottom line is, also find out if there are mental health services on the campus. It's not horrible to use mental health services because sometimes young people are going through this trauma of going into higher education, and it really is troubling for them. So ask plenty of questions. No question is a ridiculous question, and then be there for support for the young person who's going to college. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Reverend. I moved here in 1997 to go to college from Atlanta, and the first time I got sick, it was like a cold. I called my mom sobbing. I was 19. She told me to go to a drugstore and get NyQuil. I was like, oh, thanks. Useless. And useless. So the question for me then is for high school. Same type of question, but for high school. Well, Cincinnati Public, we've gone out of our way to make this complicated on you because we have schools that are K through 12, K through 6, and K through 8. So there are multiple answers. The K through 12 schools, while there aren't many of them, ostensibly the transition, I don't want to make light of anything, would probably be smoother. I won't say easier, but potentially smoother as a child has been in school with these bigger students, whether at Boiler, Riverview, Eastern, SCPA for a number of years. The K through 6 schools transitioning to 7 and having a couple buffer years, I would put those at like the second tier of probably a little more difficult, and then this is my amateur psychoanalysis, I apologize, and then the third most difficult, at least that we've seen, would then be going K through 8 in one building, and then going to a school at 9, particularly if that school that you're going to at 9th actually starts at 7. Social emotionally, not to get too into all of this educational theory and stuff, but I think it's worth just talking a little bit about it. Social emotionally, that last one, 8 to 9, where there's already been 2 years of kids bonding without your child, and then your child coming in can make it really difficult. I always kind of go there first. I realize the academics is a big part of it too, and the academics are going to be more difficult, but typically the transition tends to be more difficult, the trauma, the Reverend's point on that social emotional side. And so the answer to the question, and this is probably the hardest question that you've given because there's so many different answers, and I know we have limited time, but to the best of caregivers' ability, and this takes time, and that's where I realized, and time is privilege, and not everybody has the time to look at all the schools. And so to the extent possible, looking at what the different options are. One of the good things I think we offer at our schools is multiple options in the high schools. They're all different, right? My son's at Hayes Porter right now, and I don't know if he'll go to Taft where a lot of his friends go. I don't know if he wants to do technology or if he likes music too. He could go to SCPA. His granddaddy was a fireman. He might go to West High. You can do all different kinds of things. So I think having a grasp on that is important first. I also say, because I think it's the easiest thing to nail down, again, that sort of academic piece. What do you like? You like that? Great, there's a school for that. So we can nail that down. And then reaching out. If you need help, you can email me, Mike Morosky at Gmail. I can put you in touch with our parent champion family coordinator at CPS. We have a whole position and department for that now that can help you connect to other parents. And many people might have just heard about that for the first time. That's a marketing issue that we deal with, I get that. Or maybe we've told you 700 times, and you can tell people stuff too many times, and it is too oriented, which I get. But we do have that position, and they could help connect to other families that could maybe help you understand, what will this look like when my kid goes from, I'm just going to use my son James as an example, from the high-tech neighborhood school, Hayes Porter, and then he wants to go to SCPA and sing songs like Daddy. Well, he's in 9th grade, and he's got kids that have been there for 8 years making friends, and school looks very different than his school. And that would be shocking to him. And so I would get a hold of Rhonda Thomas at CPS and say, could you help me connect to some parents at SCPA? So I think, just to repeat, nailing down what is that interest, that's the easy part, I think, easiest. And then reaching out to talk to other families that have been there and potentially, maybe even try to like socialize the young person with some other folks who are there. Particularly, again, if you're transitioning the 7th or especially the 9th. That's probably the best answer I have, though. That's a tough one. That is a hard one. That can be hard.
So the parents' rights movement has disrupted the gains made in inclusion and diversity in the education space. So for parents and caregivers who are committed to equity, what can they do or how can they partner with policymakers to combat these harmful policy changes?
Well, thanks to many of our friends at the Urban League and the NAACP and local churches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Cincinnati Public, out of our policy committee 3 years ago, has the state's only anti-racism policy in the state of Ohio, which we're very proud of. Our Assistant General Counsel, Stephanie Scott, spearheaded the process. And then myself and my 2 colleagues, Ms. Bolton and Mr. Messer at the time, passed through the policy, and we have it. The reason I say that is because it is important that we have a policy that makes that nonsense intolerable. And if you try to come with that in our schools and treat our kids that way, it's not going to happen. You're going to be asked to leave. The other thing, this is something that really triggers me and gets me because I don't like these people at all, and I don't have any problem saying that. And when they say they want rights to be mean, and they want rights to uphold systems that keep children who don't look like my son held back. And they don't have a place in our educational system, and they certainly don't have a place in this city. Most of them, thankfully, don't try to come to us with that. We have our own drama at CPS, so we're all familiar with what that is, but we don't have that, thankfully. And so, I'd just like to reiterate that type of language and those type of movements have no place in Cincinnati or our schools, and we'll nip it in the bud.
Do you have anything?
I can. Most of this happens at the local school board level. Obviously, some of it shows up at the state level. And I think the ways in which it shows up at the state level happens at the way we structure the Department of Education, and it bleeds into higher ed too. And so I spent yesterday morning in a committee hearing about why we should ban DE&I at all public universities in Ohio. And the bill has real legs, and that's one piece of a 65-page bill, and every page is worse than the one before it. And so, someone stood up and said, this is how my morning went yesterday. Someone stood up and said, we shouldn't teach medical students that race is a factor, that they should learn about their biases in how they treat patients, because doctors don't see race, they just see patients. And I was determined going into this committee to just sit quietly and pass, and obviously I could not when that stuff started getting brought up. So there is this movement. The way I actually saw it manifest for local school districts is that those parents would come testify before our subcommittee on school funding. And the big takeaway I had, it took me a couple months to actually learn this, it was a pretty steep learning curve at first, was that we were in this committee hearing from educators, from parents, from interested parties, from occasionally students. And in Ohio, about 90% of students go to public schools. Just under that go to traditional public schools, and then some go to public charters. And I would say 70% of our testimony from parents, educators, teachers, interested parties were from private and charter schools. And so it's a big lesson for me towards the end, like, oh, we need to rectify that. Because what I spend a lot of my time in schools, I spent 6 years spending 4 to 5 nights a week around tables with parents and people in the community. But most state lawmakers, that's not their experience coming in to put it mildly. And so it matters who shows up to testify and what they say. And so it was only towards the end of the committee process, was only, for the budget was only 4 months, I started inviting parents and students to come and testify. But it's not that easy to get to Columbus. To talk about, how you respond to people and empower them. You gotta make it accessible. I mean, at one point I was so desperate, I literally sent an Uber from my district to the State House and back to get I was actually honoring some of the valedictorians and their families from Cincinnati Public, and I wanted them to come. But it matters who shows up. So for the advocates, and this matters certainly to what's happening in this building and the VCN, coordinating with us on which committees and when to show up, and then working on the testimony and getting it in time, and what's most compelling, because I can tell you what's going to make the legislators' eyes glaze over and what's not. And that is where I think there's a real opportunity, and not enough of it is happening. And I'm in the House, but on the Senate side, right, Senator Ingram is very involved in these issues and sits on these committees. And so we can coordinate and have coordinated with her office to make sure that someone's testifying in the House, and then they can go to the Senate and make the most of their time.
That's great. So for our last prepared question for the panel, what are some ways that policymakers and caregivers can partner to get more equitable access to resources for Black and Brown students, school districts, and schools?
If I can start that response, I'm not a policymaker, so I couldn't answer any of the policymaking questions. I did think about running for school board this year and talk myself out of that. And my wife talked me out of it too. So I did, but I really did think about it. However, there is a committee, a task force, Mike, that has been established called the Equity Task Force. And so they asked me to serve on that task force, and so I did go. Now, this is what I would suggest, especially in the area of DEI. If you are interested to make certain that CPS sticks to a notion of equity and diversity and inclusion, find out how to get on that task force so that your voice can, when I went, I'm not trying to make myself a hero, I was the only African-American person in the room. That doesn't make sense, not for CPS. It does not make sense. And the chief of staff, I forgot his name, Derek Little, that's his name. The chief of staff was running that task force. I would suggest to you that you get in touch with him and say that you heard about that task force here and that you want to be a part of it. Because the voice of the citizens and parents and caregivers for CPS needs to be on that task force. So that would be one of my suggestions.
This is his email. Eric Little's email. It's L-I-T-T-L-E-D, so little d, at cps-k12.org.
Got a bishop up here, Mike.
I'm trying to display, I'm trying to model how. I'm trying to model how to close the gap, Representative. And so now you know, little d at CPS. So we are, that is true though, yes, that task force is important, and you should email and say you want to be a part of it, at least have updates on what's going on. And you also, I'll just say for my part and let the representative go, it was almost like we planned that, we didn't. So we have that anti-racism policy, we talked about that, and if you're in a district that's not CPS, I did want to close the loop on that, I would suggest you approach your district, and you can always get a hold of me and I can help walk through that process of how it could be a value add to them, even if it's a district you think doesn't want to hear anything about it. I'd be happy to help you and then help them, and this has happened, unfortunately not in Ohio, but in other states, people have gotten a hold and we kind of walked through the process of how we got it done. But one thing I'll say about that, and this equity task force is part of it, so I'm not going to repeat any of that, is we passed it, and that was good. This work is super slow. That's the other thing I want everyone to walk away with knowing. Because, and I feel kind of like an amateur up here. All of you have been, I see a lot of friends out there, and a lot of people I know who are awesome advocates, and I'm honored to even have this microphone today. So I know you know this, But if you don't, this is really, really slow stuff. And I just don't want anyone to walk out and then just get frustrated because it's 2 years and nothing has happened. We passed this policy and it took a number of years before we even got somebody who could be held to account in the administration for this work, these committees, but it is happening. And so I'm not saying that's just how it goes. And the good news is it's happening. We have people like Reverend Danley on the committee. So that's all I'd say. Email Dr. Little, get a hold of me if you want to do this in your own district if it's not CPS.
Well, I shared some of it around showing up to trying to coordinate and show up to committee, but I'm a big believer that sort of knowledge is power when it comes to advocacy. And so I do want to share a little about what I learned about how state funding works for school budgets that I think is particularly relevant. So there, I'll be brief, I promise. In the, it doesn't sound like it because I'm starting in 1997, but there were a series of court cases brought mostly from folks in Appalachia in the 90s, arguing that our funding system for public schools was unconstitutional, was unequal, and that they actually ended up winning those cases. And so for the following 2 decades, Ohio, in some way or another, tried to remedy the situation and basically didn't. And so as we were living under an unconstitutional education funding system, in part because of the way it's funded by property taxes. So eventually, a bipartisan group about 5 or 6 years ago got together and spent a couple years trying to develop a new funding formula for how we fund our public schools. It is now called the Fair School Funding Formula. We are in our 3rd year currently, and the big question going into this budget cycle was, were we going to continue on the path of the Fair School Funding Formula? Because the way it was initially done was that over 6 years, the funding was going to be phased in. So we are in our 3rd year, right? So we're going to hit 50% at the end of this year. And so the big debate going into this budget was, are we going to continue funding it for years 3 and 4? Because the budgets happen in 2-year cycles. And are we going to update it at all? Are we going to adjust for inflation after what we've seen? Adjusting for inflation alone costs billions of dollars. And so I will say that certainly my proudest achievement, I think the proudest achievement for Democrats in this legislature, was that without House Democrats specifically, we would not have done either of those 2 things. It would not have been expanded and been continued, and we would not have gotten a almost 13% increase in public school funding by adjusting for inflation we basically used our veto power to say, we're not voting for a budget that doesn't include that. It came at a cost. We now have a massive, massive increase in what we spend on private school vouchers. And here's the thing, it's actually, for most Cincinnati families, and this is true in Cleveland and urban areas all over the state, we already had these vouchers in school choice built in over a decade ago. So actually the change we made in this budget was not to help those families if they want to choose whether to go to a CPS school or a private school, because they already had that choice. The change we made was to subsidize private education for parents who were already sending their kids to private schools out of their own pockets. That's who we spent over $1 billion on in this budget, and that was sort of the compromise. So we increased public school funding by 13% statewide, almost 19% for CPS, but we quadrupled private school voucher spending. So now actually, and this is the number I like to share with people, we spend, give or take, on average from the state alone, $5,000 to $7,000 on a public school student's education, from the state, right? The rest of it comes from the local share, which I'll talk to in a minute. We now spend, on average, for a private school high school student, $11,000 from the state, because there is no local share. So it gives you a sense of sort of how we're prioritizing. And then the last thing I want to share is the basics of what that funding formula is, how we fund our schools from the state. Basically, there's an assessment of a bunch of different inputs of how much does it cost to educate the average child in Ohio. That's the base cost. And then we say, okay, what about all the additional costs? It's an extra cost if they are living with a disability. It's an extra cost if they're an English language learner. It's an extra cost if they come from a low-income background, right? And then you say, okay, how many of those students does each district have compared to the statewide average? That's the additional cost. And so that's the total cost for educating a student in that district. And then there's an allocation, and this is the part that has the constitutional issues and the equity issues. how much of that cost is the local community going to bear through levies and other things, and how much is the state going to bear? And that's determined by the level of property values. That's 60% of the determination, and then 40% of the determination is income. And so basically what you're asking is, how wealthy is the district? And Cincinnati is actually considered probably too wealthy, much wealthier than it should be, because it has very high property values. But a lot of the people who live in those high property value houses go to private schools. And so their property value and wealth is increasing the amount that the city has to pay and decreasing the amount the state contributes for schools they aren't going to. So you can see the flaws in the system. So I will tell you where I am working on this and where I think equity comes in. The next phase of the fight, is on transparency and accountability for what's happening to those private school dollars. Right? If we're going to use tax dollars to pay for private schools, we should know how they're being spent. We should know whether we're getting the outcomes that they say we're getting. Right? If we're talking, and this is the thing about school choice. Yeah. One, you should know what you're choosing between, so we should be able to apples compare. And two, and this is I think the much more important piece, it is not a real choice if you're choosing between a drastically and historically underfunded public school and a state-subsidized private school. Yeah. A real choice is a well-funded public school and a private school. That's a real choice. And the last thing I want to leave you with is how to build these coalitions, because I think the future on this issue, and I've been working pretty hard on this, lies in identifying the fact that those people who brought that case in the 90s, that's why I led with this, from Appalachia, actually have a lot of the same educational equity issues that we have here in Cincinnati. When I go and visit those schools and sit with those kids and those parents, if I closed my eyes and subbed out dirt floor for chipped lead paint, the same issues between intergenerational poverty, between underfunded resources, between teachers being overworked, school counselors having 8 job titles, right? Principals staying after to be the janitor if the janitor's sick, right? Not being able to afford field trips, all of that. And so we need a coalition, an urban Appalachian coalition on educational equity. And because here's the difference, and this is what I tell the students when I go there. Students in CPS have one huge disadvantage when it comes to state policy, which is that I am their representative. And I say that sort of as a joke, but it's not a joke. I work as hard as I possibly can for those kids, but I'm in the super minority because of gerrymandering, so there's only so much I can do. The representatives who represent Appalachian school districts are in charge. They're not just in the party that's in charge, they are literally in charge. The Speaker of the House is from Southeast Ohio. The chair of the House Finance Committee is from Southeast Ohio. So that is where they have real power. And we need to try and form we can attack them, which I do sometimes, but for our kids' sake, there's much more power in actually a coalition there. And in saying if Appalachian schools get what they need, we will get what we need too. And we're not close to getting there. The fair school funding formula is not yet fair. And so that's where we need to go from here.
Thank you. So now we're going to open up the floor for question and answer. So if you have any questions, please come to the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Latasha Craig, and I work for the Louisville Urban League on the education team. But I'm speaking today as a social worker, a former administrator in the school, one who was involved in the policies and all that other stuff. I'm a very big parent advocate because I believe that the way that we engage our parents determines how we teach their children. And sometimes we believe that parents, all they give them their all, they love their kids. but sometimes a parent doesn't know what to ask because they don't know that they can ask it. And so my question really is about district accountability. I know that we have state level and we have CPS here, but what are you all doing in terms of making the district accountable for the equity? Because I know that we have the diversity, the equity, and the inclusion is the engagement part that we skip over all the time because the engagement doesn't look the way we want it to look. Grandma's raising her children. Grandma can't take a survey on a phone. She doesn't own an iPhone. So how are we engaging grandma? How are we engaging the aunt who has cancer treatments, but definitely cares about her little niece or nephew who's lost their parents, getting to school every day? So in my district, we have the resources. We have lots of them, but the accessibility to them is not happening. Yes, and we give the resources to check the box, but the engagement is the accessibility part. When it comes time for you to come and say you need our vote, you're in my church, you're in my neighborhood knocking on my door, but when it comes time for me to have resources to get to school, I have to call your secretary and their secretary and everybody's secretary, and I still can't get to you. So what is it that the state level and the board is doing to make districts accountable for making that level playing field across the board? Because we have schools who have a lot of money, schools who have a little money, but all of that money is coming from the same district. And we're $1 billion district in JCPS, billions of dollars, and we spend it horribly. And our parents get nothing, and it's not because they don't want it, it's because they don't know that they can have it.
So I think the two things that I could speak to from like where I sit and what I have the ability to impact outside. Again, you can set policies, but if they're not followed, what's it matter? So to your point, and I referenced this a little bit with the anti-racism policy, in that policy, it was a little more prescriptive than policies typically are by design, and so we included those as appendices. And what I mean by that is it asked for actual positions being created. In most policies, it's just not a good best practice for policy, but I and my committee fought to do that again. It took a number of years. So I think step one was having a person, a human being who can be held accountable. I don't want to create massive bureaucracies, but there was nobody overseeing it. So that was step one, but then step two, and we're in the process of doing this now, so I would just say our next board meeting is Monday, and that would be a good one to watch, because not a ton I can say right now, that it'll all be said publicly on Monday, is evaluating the superintendent on her job, and what we held her accountable to, a big part of which is the engagement piece. And then taking the evaluation for this year, and then creating the metrics for next year. And I can tell you that the issues that you're talking about right now, again, not in too much detail, but are top of mind for that. The last piece, so that's what like I can do and my 6 colleagues can do. But outside of that, the marketing piece is a big part of it. I call it marketing, it might not be marketing, but that's what it is, I think, of letting people know how they can access. Most people don't know that we have a person whose entire job is family engagement. We invite her to come to policy committee because we think it's important to have their voice, have her voice, Lorana's voice. So getting the word out that we have this person, and again, the surveys aren't going to work for everyone. You need a tremendous amount of time and privilege to be able to sit down and take these surveys. And the more you send it does not always equal the more people you get back. So I do think the marketing is part of it. I don't know enough, admittedly, about all the changes happening in that department, getting the word out. I just know, and I can speak very directly and clearly that my 6 colleagues feel the same way, that we oversaturate. And that's a tactic too sometimes, right? Sometimes you oversaturate on purpose because you already kind of know what you want back. And then the last thing I'll say, but I think the important part is that evaluation. And that is one of the most powerful things that we can do, is hire and fire a superintendent. And that is done via this evaluation. And what we're holding her accountable to is what we say we value. And we spent a year designing our goals and guardrails for the district, talking in person to over 2,000 to 3,000 people, not survey, but people like this, to come up with those. And so using those, a huge part of which is that engagement. One of the guardrails is the superintendent will not make decisions without consulting. It's said prettier than that. Has that happened? Could it? It has. Could it happen better? It absolutely could. And then how does that happen? That was I think, where the real proof will be. So that would be the best answer I give, but I would encourage you on Monday, if you want to stream or come to the meeting, to watch that one, because I think it's going to be really important regarding these issues.
Thank you. I'm from Louisville, so I'm JCPS, but I do want to say that one of the things that I would like to know in terms of how you all are doing it here, because we need a lot of help there, even though they don't know it. How are parents being, what is their voice? How are they getting their voice out there? I know we have the surveys and we have the, the oversaturation, but if I can't read, if I can't, if I don't have the access to watch it on TV, how are they then getting that information?
So we have done a better job with that, whether it's having surveys, et cetera, in different languages, having it be more accessible. If we'll have parents fill these things out so you can get the call, so you can hear it. If you don't have a cell phone, a landline, et cetera, and trying to be attentive to that. So trying to make sure that caregivers of all abilities have the ability to see what we are asking. And then also, and then this is just something that I know like Dunny hears me talk about a lot, and I hear Dunny say this a lot in his own way as well. I for one, and I think we've gotten better at it, and I tend to be pretty straightforward, so I would tell you if I do think we've gotten better at it. We haven't nailed it. But a big difference is in how we're wording things now versus 2 years ago, and I do think it's better. And what's better is the difference between looking for input and feedback. And so looking for feedback is you've already decided what you want. And it might be 2 options, both of which you like, and then you go to parents and say which one of these is better. And you don't really care because they're both fine. Input is what I was talking about, my opening salvo sort of like at the table with 6 people that are telling me literally the opposite of what I thought was a good idea. And then go talk to 12 other people in another neighborhood and they say the same thing. And I was like, what about my good idea? And you can only hear the same thing so many times from so many different people before you start to believe it. And that's more powerful. And that's what we're trying to get to. I'm not going to lie and sit up here and say there aren't already some fully baked in when you have a $500 million operation, all these things. You have to have some sort of, again, guardrails. And that's why we designed the guardrails. If you type in goals, guardrails, CPS, you have my email, check that out. I think that would be a good exercise. That's a massive district. I have a lot of friends down there, and yes, there are some things that they need help with, and I'd be happy to. The guardrails are a big part of it.
Thank you.
Annette Bowser, Urban League Metro Denver. I have a background in education and policy. So I wanted to ask if you guys could share ways that communities and parents can be more involved in the influence and passing of legislation and school board decisions, so that it's not people who aren't on the ground making the decisions, actually around people. So if that's committees or coming to testify or whatever that looks like. Can you guys talk about it more quickly?
I mean, I think that the clearest answer to that is asking, right? Reaching out to your legislator and getting a sense of, one, do you work on these issues? And they're not going to work on every issue. If someone reached out to me about a public health issue, I would say, I care about it, here's how I'm going to vote on it, but I will connect you to the state rep that I think is both the biggest expert on this, who is working the hardest on it, and a connection will be easier if it's made by me. If you want to know, that's Rachel Baker, who's one of our representatives, who's a PhD nurse. She's great on public health. But if you reach out to me about education issues, I'm a good person to reach out to about that, and I would work to figure out how we get you to testify, and what we get you to testify on. It helps, I think, in that way that my background is in qualitative research and working with people to develop ideas. I will say for this first year, I have focused a lot on students. So I haven't done as much parent engagement as I used to professionally. I spent a ton of time with students. One of the first things I did was set up a student advisory council that I met with every other Saturday during the budget process of CPS students. I go and I'm going tomorrow, I'm going to Lima Senior High School. If you don't know where Lima is, kind of me either. That's a joke for the camera. It's about 2 hours away. And when I go to these schools, I don't just go talk to the superintendent. I'm going to sit and have lunch with some students, and I've got some questions for them. And my questions are basically, is this school exactly what you would hope it would be? The answer is never yes. And then we go into, well, what would make it so? Right, so I'll tell you one issue and where this comes up, and how we're working on it and how parents can get involved. Student absenteeism all over the country is probably up there, if not the #1 challenge coming out of the pandemic. The culture of attending school changed. And you can't learn if you're not there. And so that is affecting, it is widening our inequities. And so we have to figure out a way to get students to school. And I went to a lot of kids and I asked them, what's going to get you to school? And a lot of them had interesting ideas, but a couple ideas kept bubbling up. One is you got to make school fun, more field trips, more experiential learning. All right, we can do that. We can fund that stuff. It's actually not that complicated to do. The other is they said, well, what's in it for me? You laugh, but I don't care what it takes to get them to school. We have to get these kids to school. They need to be there. And the numbers are astounding in how often they are not there. So we launched a pilot, or I introduced a bill to pilot. It's a bipartisan bill with the House Majority Leader, so a very powerful Republican, where we will provide financial incentives to parents of kindergartners and 9th graders every month that they attend school more than 90% of the time. I don't know that it's gonna, we'll see, but we have to be creative and thoughtful, and that came out of me going to classroom after classroom after classroom and asking students, how many people here show up less than 90% of the time to school? Over half the hands go up. How many of you would show up more than 90% of the time if you knew there was $50 a month riding on it? Not every hand went up, but a lot more did, right? So let's find out, and let's do 10 more things to figure out how we get them to school, because we need to work with parents on generating what's going to get a parent of a kindergartner to make sure their kindergartner shows up, and how can we help them do that? So that's some of the ways we're thinking about it.
So this is our next question.
Hi there, I'm Beth Glenn. I'm an education consultant and does a lot of policy work outside DC. And I'm curious of your perspective from the state and the district and local level about the experience with pandemic reform money, the federal money that came down. We had an unprecedented investment in K-12 education, still not enough from the federal level, and it all has to be spent by next year. And so over these last 3 years, what's been your experience with how that money has impacted your local schools and systems? And what can we learn from this one-time infusion as advocates? Like when we actually had money, what were we able to do, and what might we encourage our policymakers to do now that they've had this experience of having enough funding to maybe engage some of the innovative things they wouldn't have been able to do before?
So I think about this every day, because we have to make, at minimum, a $65 million cut to our budget next year, no matter what. So the first, my initial response is, it wasn't awesome, thanks, but no thanks. We will probably end up having to make it $80 million or less, a little between 65 and 80 million, because 65 is for sure. We will cut $65 million. That is an existential number that can't make sense until it happens. And we've started the budget process in October of 2023, which is not normal for those of you who don't pay close attention to this stuff. And we're talking about it every single meeting until we have to pass our budget. And we're doing that, obviously, to try to mitigate the surprise. But it will be a surprise because, again, it's an existential number. And so the money was welcome, and we needed it for technology. To answer your question, we spent a lot of ours on, we had to spend it on certain things, right? We didn't have a lot of ability, so we spent ours on technology, bandwidth, making schools safer, ecologically speaking, lighting, vents, air, etc. And then, of course, masks and all that, which we're not spending as much on anymore. We were also able, and this will lead me to answer your question directly, We were also able to help bring nurses into all of the schools. Our nurses are city employees, but we pay them, which there are issues there. And same with our crossing guards, we also pay them, but they're city employees. And so that's, you know, a point of contention at times, but we were able to have nurses, and we're not now. And so my answer is we need more money, period. Rep. Isaacson has talked about this and sort of how we get bled, particularly in the urban centers. Part of the reason, you know, Rep. Isaacson is way better at being a politician, and I think that's a really honorable word, not a bad word. He's better at doing it than I am, because I'll say part of the reason our district gets screwed more than Appalachia is because our state is run by racist people that don't like the kids in our district. And we feel it. And there are very deliberate actions taken by them to hurt our children and my son's friends at his school. And it upsets me. And part of the deliberate actions they take is making sure that my kids do not have access to the same things that other students do who don't look like them at the private schools. And I have a real problem with that. And so the answer, money doesn't solve everything, but the only people that say that are people with money. Money can't buy happiness is said by rich people. And so a lot of my friends would beg to differ with both of those phrases. And so we need more money so that my students have the same chance at a life that, you know, their private school or wealthier friends have. And so that, again, looks like having nurses in school. We have the technology now. We were able to provide more summer opportunities, and I'll stop after this. That was something else I thought we were able to do that was good, was we were able to provide more summer opportunities for families. Those will go away coming up.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I'm Rhonda from Detroit, and I have been a parent organizer for almost 20 years. So my question is, I've always heard parents are scared of administrators, the principals are scared of the superintendent, and the superintendent's scared of the school board. Well, here in our city of Detroit, our superintendent is not afraid. So my question is, who and how do I get parents as a parent engagement organizer? How do I empower my parents to be able to speak on these policies and changes for their children? Second, thank you for pointing on chronic absence, because that's where I am now. We have chronic absence, but you close our schools down and you take our children miles and miles, but you don't want to provide the transportation because they don't stay in the rim of the miles. So how are we really addressing chronic absence? So I heard earlier about the Title I, doing professional development. Policy changes, systems with the Title I dollars would be fine, but you know what? The principal's still at the top, not the PTA president. It's still the principal that regulates and negate what training is going to be for our parents. So I really want to know, who do we go to address our superintendent, because he ain't afraid of nothing. Thank you.
So I'm going to jump in here real quick and say this is our last question, so we can.
I think one of the things that can happen, especially in the community, is to have people like Mike, Ronnie come to the church where most of our folks are and come and talk about the issues. For instance, one of the things that struck me was, and I think this might be the first time I heard about this, the $65 million cut. Now I know there's been some meetings to talk about that $65 million cut, but I don't know how many of the folks who are CPS folks in this room have attended any of those meetings, because the cuts are going to happen. And so maybe my church is Christ Emmanuel, so maybe I invite Mike or some of the other board members to come to Christ Emmanuel, meet with the parents and caregivers at my church, and we talk about what does that $65 million cut look like, and how is it going to impact our kids. Otherwise, folks, if our voice is not at that table, the cuts, Mike made it very clear, the cuts are going to be made, but what they are could be determined by the conversation that happens at the table.
So, yes, that was also the last answer. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today and having this robust conversation. I'm sure if you hang out a little later, we can answer some of the questions that the audience has. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Thank you very much. And thank you, Tamara, for being such an amazing moderator. Let's give her a hand as well. All right, you guys, the time is 11:47, and we want to return from lunch at 12:30. So I believe the caterers are all ready for you all to come outside. So if you don't mind, go ahead and take a break, and we'll see you back at 12:30.
Right, all the presentations that you're going to hear today are situated in education, but they are impacting everything else, all parts of life, all parts of the way that we interact with each other, the way that opportunities are opened or closed. And so the importance really of this work and this particular grant is elevating the work of multi-sector coalitions. So I'd like to invite you to do a brief thought experiment before we get into our first presentation. So let's think back to 2019. This is pre-pandemic, or BC, before Corona. And we had an opportunity through the Hewlett Foundation to, as Hal said, really elevate public will. What does building public will look like as sort of a next step for our EEP work? One of the prime ways that we organize ourselves within the EEP work is to do stakeholder circles. And those are opportunities to elevate locally resonant issues with folks in the community. What do people care about? What can people kind of galvanize around? And so you might have a parent, you might have a teacher, you might have specific individuals that you invite to these kinds of conversations. And so this opportunity was for us to sort of take that to the next level. What does it look like when we go past the stakeholder circles and actually work to build out coalitions? And so the first 3 affiliates that we funded to do this work were the Knoxville Area Urban League, the Urban League of Nebraska, and the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. And so they went on their way. They're working with their school districts, they're developing their coalitions, they're figuring out what are the issues that folks are most concerned about. What can we really galvanize some support and some strength around? 2019 is, we're going, everything is moving. We have some visits scheduled at the beginning of 2020. We go to Nebraska in 2020. We go to a series of robust community meetings with the police chief, the fire chief. We were like, oh, this is amazing. Like, we look at the power of the coalitions. And then in February, this is like late February of 2020, we went to Atlanta. We met with the CEO, and we went to APS, Atlanta Public Schools, and we learned about what their focus and their initiative was going to be, which was around the race to read. They had marketing campaigns that were going to do bus wraps, bus shelter wraps, all of these things. And then the pandemic happened. So because this work was very outward facing, when everything shut down, including the schools, and went to remote work, it really hindered and hampered the efforts of what folks were doing. And so obviously Hewlett was understanding, as most of us are understanding, as to what the limitations were with that particular initiative. But they provided an opportunity again for us to work to continue this work. And so in this iteration, we have the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, the Urban League of Louisiana, and the Urban League of Greater Cleveland. And so this is really an opportunity for us to celebrate the success of this particular project coming to completion and all of the work that they have done over the last 18 months. So I'm excited to introduce our first presentation and our first presenter, Ms. Jasmine Costin, who is the Vice President of Government and Community Relations at the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio. So thank you so much, Jasmine. Come on.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm proud to serve as the Vice President of Government and Community Relations for the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, which involves the Dayton market as well as the Cincinnati market. So I'm really excited to share with you what we've been working on when it comes to educational equity. Our policy work, and I lead our policy work at ULGSO, and it is housed in our Center for Social Justice. But a little background, our vision at the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio is vibrant communities with thriving individuals, families, and businesses. And our mission is to transform generations by promoting personal empowerment and economic self-sufficiency. We have kind of two ways that we go about that, community leadership and financial empowerment. And so I just wanted to kind of give you that context. Sorry about that. I'm going backwards. Ooh, sorry. But I wanted to kind of talk to you about the model that we have at our Center for Social Justice, where kind of policy is. Our model is based on three things and how they inform one another. So we deal with advocacy, and we want to build relationships with key stakeholders. We want to equip our network with the skills and knowledge of processes and systems, because we know that traditionally we've been excluded from those processes and systems. And we want to develop targeted asks based on our experiences and our data. And of course, that data is a part of it, because we need those hard numbers and those facts to guide and inform our work and reform our work in decision making. And we want data transparency to lead to accountability, right? We need to know what's going on and how it's happening. And then the third, but equally as important, sometimes maybe the most important, is that organizing pillar. And organizing is about building power, it's about building trust, and it's about building community. And that's kind of the context that I want to bring here today, because our public will, building public will, was about building public will, but it was more so about building that trust with our Black caregiver network, building community with our stakeholders, and building power for all of us. Our goal in education equity is to create a system of accountability that amplifies Black caregivers. We use the term caregiver and not parent, because parent is not a nimble enough category, right? We know that in Black households, it could be grandma, it could be auntie, it could be neighbor, it could be whomever. And so we didn't want to use these terms that are just thrown around in education as a one size fits all. We wanted to be really clear that if you are giving care to a student, that's who you are. And so we wanted to amplify those voices and measure what matters to them, giving them the tools and the power to hold the system accountable and elect candidates aligned with their values. Our goal was to show you are a stakeholder, whether you are seen that way or not, and what can we do as the Urban League to show the community and to make sure that they understand that you actually are and engage you as such. More about advocacy, accountability, and activation. We wanted to, in the end, activate our parents. So taking them from a space where education was happening to them and to their students, to where they were active participants and things were happening and they were co-creating things. So our organizing model, we hired an organizer who was amazing, Kelly Dukes. She actually was offered another position by the DCCC because of the work that she had been doing. And they were like, we see that she's doing amazing. And so we were like, that's great, wonderful. But I'll talk to you about how we did this model. We did about 200 one-on-ones, not just with caregivers, but with other stakeholders in education, business owners, staff in schools, school board members. We created a Black caregiver network to go from the individual to the group. And then when we worked with community partnerships, we engaged everyone in education that we could. We then even went to in-school support. And our in-school support looked like Kelly, who was a former teacher, going into third grade classes because we knew that pickup and drop off were the times when caregivers would be there, so she needed to be in the classroom. She also got to know the kids because the best way to build trust with parents is for them to understand we care about your children, we care about your students, we care about your young people. We also offered support when parents came to us. For instance, we had a parent who was blind who said, I keep receiving text messages as my only form of communication from school. So we knew that that was an issue, and we had, Kelly would go to the school and say, hey, this doesn't work. Who do we talk to? And would sit with parents when they were experiencing things like that, and then be the liaison when they spoke with administration, because administration knew us because of the conversations and relationships that we built with them. So from there, it was like we were the intermediary so that the parents could walk into that meeting not feeling like they were going to an authority figure, but going to an equal. I am here as an expert of my experience and my students' experience, and you are the expert in the education that you provide. But it's not this hierarchical dynamic. So our Black Caregiver Network. These are some of our parents, and you see they have our t-shirts on. Through all of the things that we talked to parents with, we wanted to come up with, what is our issue? What is your issue, guys? What do you want to talk about? And what kept coming up to us was that they want to be seen, heard, and valued. They had not been engaged by districts and educational leaders in a way that invited them to be stakeholders. They were talked at, they were not talked to, they were dictated to, they just felt very powerless. And so the lack of access to power uncovered the need for this. We realized, what are we gonna do? There isn't one issue, the issue is the way that you're being engaged. So what happened was we co-created this space for them to be, and we started meeting twice a month. The first meeting was a meeting where, sometimes it was just commiserating about, I'm sick of my school. But we recognized that type of active listening and the ability for them to come together and say those things was building trust with us as the Urban League, but also among each other. And then the second meeting that we had each month was a time for us to really say, okay, what are we gonna do about it? We've talked about how we feel, but how are we going to move forward? And that was usually with a smaller group of parents, of course, that we ended up calling our parent leadership team. And that team would say, all right, these are the things that have happened. These are the things that I've heard. And this is how we're going to move forward. We want to develop a survey. We want to do all of these things. So those were the ways that we kind of engaged. Conducted over 200 one-on-one conversations. They had a survey that went to 4 different schools. We focused in on 4 different schools in CPS because we knew we couldn't cover the entire amount, but we got 187 responses. And the parents were the ones who came up with the survey. The parents were the ones who were going to their fellow parents and taking the survey. And so it was really a wonderful way to see that the parents, the narrative that we usually hear is Black parents aren't doing enough. They're not doing this, they're not doing that. We're always hear about how they're not showing up. They showed up for this. They were the ones doing this. And that was important to me because when they say that Black parents aren't doing anything, it's like, well, what does that mean? Most of the schools are Black students. So what are you really saying? And so that was an important narrative for us to change. So these are also, because we also were during the time of, not post-COVID, but after lockdown, I don't know how we're calling all of these things. We were still not fully outside, let's say that. So we did a lot of engagement online, which was a barrier. It was difficult. People are tired of Zoom. They were tired of Zoom in 2021, right? But we still had parents who were showing up twice a month, and we had different things for them. Like I said, we had parent roundtables. We had conversations with people in education. We had action assemblies. What happened in January of 2021 was the district was about to go completely maskless and completely back to school. And people were like, excuse me? So the district had a meeting and the Black Caregiver Network had a meeting. And at our meeting, we decided like that doesn't work. So we went to the school board meeting en masse, and we had parents signing up to speak, and they talked and talked and talked and gave their feelings. Some of these parents had never been to a school board meeting before, right? Not even in person, but now online they signed up, and they talked about how it wasn't good for them. They had done the research, right? They had talked to one another, and the district decided, all right, we'll have a mask mandate, we'll see how it goes, but it changed things. And we realized after that particular meeting and the way that was going, that we were building public will because we started getting calls. Now, I worked at the city, I had a lot of relationships with local elected officials, so I started getting calls on my personal cell phone like, so I hear the Urban League has parents. This is the president of the school board. I want some of them on my advisory committee. Oh, do you now? But that was really exciting because we recognized that the word was out, that our parents were showing up as experts, that we knew that they were, and that they were being now called on to advise the president of the school board. That was a win. So we had events. We went places. We shared our message far and wide. When we got outside in the summer, we went to those things. And one of our important partners was our local coffee shop, a Black-owned coffee shop. Everybody goes there. Everybody's there. Everyone from the mayor to, the parents. And we would have things there. We would show up with our cups and our T-shirts and just talk to people and say, hey, have a cup of coffee with me. Tell me what's going on with your student. Tell me what's important in your educational life. Tell me how you feel as a caregiver. And these things were exciting, and it was exciting to be able to build that in our community for us, by us, making sure that whenever we had something, we would have it there because that's Black-owned. When we had catering, it was a Black-owned caterer. These are the ways that we would engage and do the work of the Urban League through this initiative. So in coming through our top caregiver concerns, it was, what are the things that matter to you? Understanding school politics. As I said in the beginning, a lot of us have been historically excluded from politics, feeling like we are politically astute, feeling like our votes matter, our words matter, our candidates matter, etc. So we wanted to talk about what that looked like. What are the school politics? School culture. We wanted schools, our caregivers wanted schools that were free of bias, and they wanted culturally responsive teaching. And then parental engagement. We wanted better relationships between themselves and school staff, and we wanted the schools to redefine engagement. Sorry. We wanted schools to redefine engagement because the way that many of our parents felt, and I'm a young mom, I felt this way too. If you're not baking cookies and showing up, then they don't feel like you're engaged, and they don't validate that engagement. So that became the heart of kind of what we wanted to do, was how do we redefine engagement to include Black caregivers and the way that we're able to be engaged. So those were our focus issues around parental engagement, because we kept coming back to that. We kept coming back to, I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, I don't feel valued. Along that, we started coalition building, and the president of the school board reached out to us and said, there is a Don't Say Gay bill. You've heard about those in other states. It came to Ohio as well. And they said, hey, we want you to join with us to write a letter opposing House Bill 616, which was the Don't Say Gay bill. And this was the first time that we got to build with GLSEN. And that was really exciting for me because, you know, I had heard people say things whenever Pride would come around. What is the Urban League doing? You know, how does the Urban League feel about Pride? And I'm like, how do we feel about Pride? What is that even a question? But this was our opportunity, right? This was an opportunity to do something to show that we're for equality. We're empowering people. We want thriving communities and neighborhoods, as I said in the beginning, and that includes us all. So we wrote it, and what I put on here was that we included the language of our caregivers. Sorry, I'm not doing well with the clicker. I included the language of our caregivers in the bill. It says schools need to be places where students feel seen, heard, and valued for who they are. And schools also need to help students learn how to work alongside people who have different backgrounds and experiences. From that letter, we, as the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, were asked by GLSEN to walk with them in the Pride Parade. That was the first time we had ever walked in a Pride Parade in Cincinnati, which was huge. When we walked and we were holding our banner and we were right there with GLSEN and we, you know, were decked out, as you can see, in all of our cool Pride gear, seeing the faces of the Black folks in that parade, watching us walk down, it almost brought me to tears because I thought, how beautiful it is to be seen by the Urban League in this space. How beautiful it is. This is much bigger than just a partnership. This is what building coalition looks like. This is what it looks like to show up for all of the ways that we exist. Other partners that we have: Cincinnati Public Schools, School Board School, which is a professional development program that equips people who want to run. We had 2 of our Black caregivers graduate from that program. GLSEN, of course. Cohere, which is an organization in Cincinnati that is about bringing, they believe that the people who are closest to the problem, of course, have the best answer. And so they are whenever we have something, they organize to get folks there and vice versa. Cradle to Career, Cincinnati NAACP, and the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers. So these are just some of the educational partners that we have. So again, talking about being seen, heard, and valued, and really we went from just what does that feel like to our caregivers to what does that actually look like. So when I come in the classroom or when I come into the school, I want to feel welcome. I want to feel that this school community is free of judgment and it's understanding of my individual circumstances, whether it's positive or negative, right? I want to feel valued. I want to be included in the decision-making process on the school level, but also beyond that. I don't want to just find out what's happening at the budget meeting. I want to know what's going on. And then I want to hear heard that the policies are consistent across the district, so at this school and that school and that school, we're not talking about 3 different things. Let it be consistent. And we want to feel a part of the community with more attention given to positive caregiver behavior rather than what's not happening. Because that was also a big thing that came up in COVID was, oh, there are so many Black children who are not logging on and we're so worried about them and what's going on and why are they not able to do this, that, and the other? Well, what about the ones who were? Right? There's always this hyper focus on what's lacking, not on the assets in our communities, and we wanted to change that. So we developed a toolkit that we were going to release to our district, right? Usually a toolkit is released to us. We're going to give it to you because there's some things you need to understand about us. And so inside this toolkit is our data. So we talk about the survey that we conducted and what came out of that, which I'll show you in just a moment. Our why, which came straight from the caregivers of what exactly are we doing. And then we developed a spectrum of engagement that we gave to our board members that showed that we want the teachers, administrators to understand that baking cookies and being the classroom parent is not the only way that people show up. That it is indeed a spectrum, and that at any point throughout the year, I could be at any part of this spectrum, but it's all valid. And then what our asks were. They came up with specific asks of the district. So this is kind of the branding for our Black Caregiver Network toolkit. And it gives our why, talks about the organizing that we've done, because that's what's powerful when you talk about political dynamics. People want to know, what does your base look like? Who are the people that follow you? Do you even have a critical mass? That's why we wanted them to know. Oh yeah. And they saw at that meeting. We specified what we do: community organizing, public awareness campaigns, and caregiver support. And then again, we laid out exactly what it feels like. That, and this one is really important. When caregivers want to be seen, that there is an overwhelming belief that caregivers love their children and want them to succeed. I have heard so many negative things about, these parents don't X, Y, or Z about their children. And that was one of the things that we all came to a really clear and quick consensus about, was we were going from the belief that every single parent loves their child and wants the best for their child, right? Now, circumstances may cause behaviors to look a little interesting, but if we come from the idea that everything that is happening from a caregiver on behalf of their child is because of the love that they have and the desire for them to succeed, you're going to have a completely different hypothesis about why that behavior is happening, right? This was also important. We had in the toolkit that we understand that there are caregivers in survival mode. And we're not talking about survival mode, right? If you're in survival mode, if you are in a deep level of trauma, you may not fall on this spectrum. Your children may not come to school ready to learn. Your children may not be at school. There may be a whole bunch of things coming on, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about caregivers who are not in that space, but we also are providing help for them if they are in this space of survival mode. And we said survival mode because we're not going to throw them away and say, oh, they're just bad parents. They're not. Circumstances are causing them to have to focus on surviving, and that puts us all in a different space. So acknowledging that was also really important to our network. We wanted to move, the spectrum of engagement was seeking to move the mindset of the district from traditional to transformative, because we know that we're not included in traditional ideas and definitions of what good parenting and education look like. The spectrum seeks to move away from individual caregivers or teachers' job to a shared responsibility, moving away from events-driven engagement to results-driven engagement, moving away from inconsistent top-down policies to community-driven, sustainable policies. And here's our spectrum. So we go from an informed parent, invested parent, an involved parent, an interactive parent, an interested and then invested parent. And this is what it looks like. Informed is a caregiver who's well informed about the school teachers, but they may not be able to be present within the school community. This information should be presented to them in a clear, consistent way. School districts should share information in a variety of ways, including calendar invites and direct communication. So at the top, you'll see this is what the parent is and this is what they look like. And then it's an example of how you communicate best with this parent and ways to engage them best. So then when you look on the other end of the spectrum to an invested, this is the parent that is going to attend the board meetings, that is going to be in the community meetings. And these parents need opportunities to directly connect with board members. So it shows that at any space, these are the best ways to engage that parent to validate their engagement as well. This data is about kinship and grandship families, because in Ohio we realize that a lot of caregivers are, again, not parents, not biological parents. And so because of that, we wanted to make sure that we were showing you have to expand this. It's not this, nuclear family that is the norm, quote unquote. Our families look different, Your families clearly also look different, and so we need for you to validate that as well. So our survey was a 3-question survey because we knew that parents were tired of taking 50, 60 question surveys, and that's why they weren't getting a good response. We did 3 questions. We had a QR code. We would show up at drop-off. We would show up at pickup time, and you could do it on your phone. Simple questions. We got 187 responses. First question, do you feel welcome in your child's school? Valued. This is the value part. Are you valued? This should not be this close, as we know. Have you attended the most recent parent-teacher conference night or school family night? If not, what was the biggest barrier? This was beautiful data because our parents were pretty much there, even though that's not the narrative we see. We also see that the times of the conferences are between 2:45 and 5:45. So I can tell you at the Urban League, I was not making those conferences. I was doing other work, right? We see how many had said that there was no virtual option, that there was a lack of transportation, a lack of childcare. So our parents weren't being seen, literally because they weren't even being looked for. And then how often have you seen your child's principal interacting? 77 said never. Can you imagine going to a school and never seeing your principal as a parent? How do you feel heard that way? And can you imagine when you have seen them that it's because of a behavior issue or something that's happened with your student? So that's your only interaction. So this data was, again, really important. And then we came to our asks. We want our district to fully adopt and implement the Black Caregiver Network Spectrum of Engagement. We want their engagement director as well as each school building to understand the ways in which they can best connect with parents. We know that if they connect with all parents this way, that this is going to be a tide that lifts all boats. We understand that. We hope that they do. We want CPS to redesign their parent-teacher conference model and adopt an all-day parent-teacher conference day where caregivers are able to schedule a conference at any time during the day, including a virtual option if desired. And then the biggest thing that came up, which was very interesting from a number of our parents who were on the LSDMCs, which are the local school decision-making committees, they wanted them to redesign the principal selection process. They realized, because they were in those meetings now and they had the information, that this is not very equitable, and we want to see the full list of candidates. What was happening in CPS was that they would send 2 or 3 principals to a school. There's a whole list of people who are eligible, but they would just send 3 to a school and say, this is who you have to choose from. They said, no, we want all of the choices. We want to see more. We want to be a part of it. And then the district would choose which candidates would get interviews. And they said, no, we want to be a part of that. Which I was like, okay, parents, go ahead. I love it. But it goes to show you, when given the information and given the care and being respected as experts, what our parents can do. Here are more pictures of the work that we've done, our partners, us having fun with one another, connecting. And then in August, I got a letter and we won an award for our work. Thank you. Our work was recognized by the STEMIs and the Gaskins Foundation, which they usually are selecting people who are in the STEM careers. However, they chose the Urban League and the work of the Black Caregiver Network because of the way that it was empowering parents and students. So I wanted to have one of our parents speak. She was interviewed for the STEMmies, and let's see, I wanted you to hear her.
And getting to know them, building community centered around the kids, around the schools, their academic performance, and again, just getting to know other parents. And then lastly, positioning ourselves as a parent group to do greater things in terms of advocacy over policies, influencing decision-making at the school level, and anything that basically or ultimately improves the school and the performance of the students in the schools. So we met with parents in the form of PTAs or even in non-traditional ways of having parent groups, surveys as well, and even going into the schools to be kind of temporary fixtures in the schools to get to know the teachers and the students. I think action starts with awareness, so that's always baseline. Let's tell the people what we do, what our goals are, what our mission is. Get feedback from them. What are your goals? What's your mission? And then ultimately, how can we work together? And I think we are activated, although it may not seem like a large parent group. The fact that people know and you can easily call someone or text someone to say, here's what we're doing, we need your input, whether you're there or not, to go do, to accomplish some goal. I think that's been pretty key. So awareness and having a common voice and then doing work together. I think it's a continuation of, again, increasing awareness and advocacy. It can happen on so many different levels. If you just take the performance of schools overall and the imbalance in terms of performance for the schools and the reputation of the schools. If you just look at that, and that is the number one goal, you will see that it's a lifetime of work that still needs to be done. So we'll continue to advocate, to gather parents, to network in order to improve schools and schooling.
So we were really excited to see that. That let us know that we were being seen. That wasn't our key goal, was just like, let's win an award. But it was great to know that people were watching and people saw the ways that we were affecting education in Cincinnati, empowering caregivers and equipping them. Go back here. This was the night of the STEMmies, and our organizer, Kelly Dukes, and some of our parents who went, and that is the award, and we were really excited about that. I think that the biggest thing that we learned was we have to change the master narrative, right? We have to change the master narrative that we are not involved as caregivers, that the outcomes that are happening with our students in schools are because of a lack of love or support or care from caregivers. I think that we also have to recognize that if we want people to show up, we have to have a space for them. We have to make them feel like they are valued. We have to ultimately see them, hear them, and value them in order to see what exactly they can do and how high they can fly. And that's really the biggest learning that I got overseeing this work. I am so proud of the work that we were able to do, and I'm so excited to see how we can move forward, but I'm also really clear that it is a long-term work. This is not just a turnaround and grant cycle work. This is a work that we're going to have to continue to do. So we are, currently looking for the best ways to continue that work. We know that, ending generational poverty is not going to happen without us working in the education system. And so that is something that we are committed to doing. But I'm really excited and grateful for the chance to share what we've done with parents, share the coalitions that we've built, and present this to you. And now I'll pause for questions. Mm-hmm.
Like, were any of them teachers or in the education system? Were any of their children, like, what were their children? Did you have parents whose kids were on the honor roll, or whose some were failing? You know what I mean? So just was kind of curious on.
So our caregiver spanned, which was another reason that I really loved the caregiver network and loved them, because Sarah is working on her PhD. Her students are on the honor roll. You know, she's on the LSDMC. She is one of those invested parents. And then we had parents who would come sometimes and not, and their parents their students were dealing with some behavioral issues or other types of issues where they needed wraparound services, and but they were all able to come together and be on the same level and not feel like, oh, well, that mom is doing more than me, or, you know, whatever it was. So it really was the gamut. We didn't have any teachers per se, but we did have some parents who were like permanent fixtures in the parent center at their school, or, you know, who maybe had a background in education but are now doing something else. It ran the gamut.
And did the grade level of their students, did they range, like, you might have freshmen, seniors?
So we focused this cycle on elementary schools. So we had a couple parents, like the mother who was blind, her student was a high schooler, and she came to us because she had heard of what we had done. But mostly it was elementary schools. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes.
First, thank you for the presentation.
Absolutely, thank you.
You did a great job with identifying and addressing issues you remarked with. The one thing I want to know is like process of going about establishing those coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very difficult, obviously, and I just want to know what's like specific framework that you have, you and your team came up with as far as establishing those connections, and once you did establish those connections, how did you just keep it going forward? Because it's very hard to lose those connections.
Sure. And, you know, honestly, I will say that some of our partners, or the people that we were establishing coalitions with, were a little flaky. So I'm not going to say that that's not an issue, but I am a gadfly. So I will call you. Like I said, I used to work for the city. I, you know, have done political consulting before. So I am at all of the places where the people in Cincinnati, it's like 2 degrees of separation. So I would just walk up to people at, you know, something and be like, hey, you know, our caregiver network is doing this, that, or the other. Have you heard? And they're like, oh, okay. But you will hear from me because it's important. So I think that there has to be a fair amount of, you know, resilience and recognize and not taking things personal. So it's like, oh, well, this person that hasn't called me back, so they may not want to be on board. Sometimes in the world of, you know, COVID, you just forget. So I think making sure that you are doing that, but on the other side of that, also, who are the people who are connected to that person so that they'll continue to hear about
Ladies
it?
and gentlemen, time is now 12:30. We're going to go ahead and proceed with our program. Again, we'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here with us today at Building Parent and Policy Power Convening. And it's been amazing 2 days. The next, and before we close, we want to invite our community organizer, Kelly Dukes, and we're going to invite back up the Senior Director of Data Analytics at the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio, Miss Kendra Reeves, to help us pull this all together. They're going to talk to us about the strategies for Black caregivers, for the Black Caregivers Network. So ladies, if you would join me, thank you. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Renee. Hello again, everyone. I appreciate your time to stick it with us for the last day and a half. I'm going to introduce you formally to Ms. Kelly Dukes, who is the Outreach Director for Congressman Craig Lesman. She's going to talk about her work here at CSJ, the community organizing she did for the Black Caregivers Network, and then I will do a presentation after her. So,
And thank you, Kendra, and welcome everyone. I didn't realize that we had folks from all over the country, so this is really amazing to see that everyone is coming together to learn more about this work. So I'll just jump right in. So I actually started here at Center for Social Justice when this was just nuts and bolts and a planning, so it's really nice to see it come to full fruition. But we kind of embarked on a mission to organize parents and try to decide what that looks like. I would say that a lot of folks would say that organizing parents is easier said than done. I think it's easier done than said. One of the main things that I did is I just went out in the community. So we started with basic one-on-one conversations. I went to every single community organization event. There were things at rec centers, there were events at schools. And I literally went and just posted up and had one-on-one conversations with parents, usually about 20 to 40 minutes. Very, very strategic conversations. So it's not a therapy session. It's not a, time for you to come and complain about your sister, your cousin, and your aunt and your uncles. We are here to talk specifically about what their desires were, what they ideally wanted to see for their child and for their community. And from those conversations, I was really able to gauge with folks what their true values were, and then be able to weave those values together with other people. Over a year, I will be honest with you, I had about 300 one-on-ones. Yeah, about 300 one-on-ones. Talked about 300 different parents. Some folks I talked to repeatedly, but pretty much we were just going throughout the city and talking to folks. From those 300, I believe you all have met the 3 that were the most involved. You met those folks yesterday, Dr. Sarah. So I say that to say, your parents are all going to be on different levels. And we have to respect that, that whole saying of meet people where they are. You actually have to practice that. And one of my colleagues, who is not here down in the audience, the VP Jasmine Coaston, I'm sure you all might, I don't know if she presented here. But there was one day we had a parent and she was irate. I mean, this lady was cussing me out, mad at me. I just came to the school to have one on me. I don't even know what happened with the child. Was upset with the principal. And so I, in my mind, I'm like, this is ridiculous. This woman acting like this and da-da-da-da. And Jasmine turned to me and she said, let's think about this differently. She said, how much power do you think that woman actually thinks that she has? How many other times today has someone disrespected her, made her feel unseen or unvalued? And maybe this time when she just went off on you, that was the first time she felt powerful today. That was her exerting her power. That was everything else that really made her mad came out on you. And maybe that wasn't necessarily right, but it happens, right? So I can meet that parent where she was. Let her have her moment, let her complain, let her yell, and then come back to her at a later time and talk about where that actually came from. So that's what I say when I say meeting people where they are. Not judging people for where they live, what they look like, how they talk. Because you're going to meet a lot of different parents. You're going to have parents that are doctors. You're going to have parents that have never had a job. You're going to have parents that are extremely young. You're going to have parents that are older. You're going to have parents that are, second, third generation parents. You're raising your great-grandchildren, your grandchildren. So really have to understand to meet people where they are and to have those really intentional conversations. But the conversation is really just about learning what their values are. So once we did that, like I said, I organized with Dr. Sarah and some other parents. We had what was called an issues assembly. So over that 300 conversations, there were certain things that I kept hearing. No matter who I was talking to, no matter how they described their situation, it pretty much sounded like something else I had already heard. So we had an issues assembly where we invited every single parent that I had talked to. Again, meeting people where they were, so it's kind of post-pandemic. People really didn't want to meet, so it was virtual. We had it at 6 o'clock in the evening, which is usually around what time people eat, so we sent everybody a pizza. Everybody got a pizza delivered to your house that day from the urban to make sure your family was fed so you could be on this call. And then we literally presented these issues to parents, like, hey, these are the top 5 issues that we are consistently seeing coming up. Help us narrow these down to 3. And we did that by going into breakout rooms, having parents discuss why they thought their topic should be one of the top 3. Came back into the larger room, and we just did an old school majority vote. From that, we came down to 3 main issues, which were parental involvement, trauma-informed and culturally responsive teaching, and funding for schools. But once we started looking at those as broader issues, we decided that parental involvement drove the other two. And that we saw that schools that had high parental involvement also had better teachers and more funding, right? So how do we increase parental involvement in schools? So myself and those parents embarked on creating the Cincinnati public school system, which I think they've kind of adopted or working towards adopting, what we call a spectrum of engagement. Where we did not want parents to be judged on their engagement based off the traditional, you're at every single parent-teacher conference, you're baking cookies, you can come here in the middle of the day and do X, Y, Z. We also wanted them to understand that that spectrum is a fluctuation. Depending on what's going on in that family's life and that parent's life, there might be one year that this is a great parent, they're super involved, something that's happened to death. You know, like I said, we went through a pandemic. We had some family that lost a whole caregiver. So, you know, they went from being a great involved parent and now they're lower on the spectrum. So we went about, like I said, creating a spectrum of engagement where parents would not be judged, but they would be focused. And in that way, we could engage, the school could engage with that parent based on where that parent fell within that spectrum. I feel like it was very successful. Teachers and parents seemed to love it. Like I said, it kind of broke those traditional stereotypes of what parental involvement needs to be. So I would really charge you, as you all go back into your cities, that's where you kind of really need to start, in those two places. Really connecting with just random parents. And then two, really pushing your schools to redefine what they consider to be engagement. Because right now, we're holding our parents to like this 1952, you know, Anglo-Saxon ideal of what involvement is. It's a different time, right? We got 2-year-olds that know how to work an iPhone. It's a different time. So we have to approach every aspect of education differently. Not just the way we teach the kids, but also the way we involve the parents. Okay, well then I'm going to have Kendra come back up, Vice President of Data Analytics for the Urban League, and also one of my fellow colleagues, since I started with Kendra as well, so again, it's always good to be here with my lead family.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to be talking about today the survey that we did for the Black Caregiver Network to kind of put everything together that we've been talking about for the last day and a half. So my agenda, because I am that person, so we're going to be talking about what the survey involves, the results, as well as why data is important and how we can use this data, but also talking about how to make it practical. Not everywhere has a data person, or you have the funding available to have a data person dedicated to this type of work. So I want to make sure that I'm giving you practical steps if you want to replicate a survey like this in your area. Okay, so the purpose of this survey was to really get an understanding of how caregivers and parents felt, how they felt seen, valued, and heard by the administrators in the various schools that we threw this out to. We used a random sampling of the survey, so there were 3 questions. So I know you're used to surveys that are like 20, 50, 60, 100 questions. We made it really simple because we knew that we were dealing with caregivers who don't always have the time or the capacity to sit down and fill out a 10-question, 20-question survey. And so within 4 months in 2022, we distributed this survey randomly. And random sampling is the best and ideal way when it comes to survey data, and that's why we chose that, because we wanted to make sure we were getting the most diverse voices heard in this survey. So the random sampling was at 5 Cincinnati public schools. They were throughout the region, including east, west side, the east side, the west side, and center, the city center. The total responses that we got for this survey was 187. And I know that seems small, but that's actually a pretty amazing number. Because again, we're thinking about the people and the population and the audience that we're using here, and so 187 is nothing to sneeze at. The only thing that we can't do with this survey is generalize. So when it comes to survey data, you need a large population to make sure that we can generalize to other populations that are similar to our region. While we cannot generalize with this data, we can use this as a starting point for the school board here to really share this information that was never shared before or never even captured. So let's talk about some of the results that we got from this quick 3 survey questions. So the first question we asked was, do you feel welcomed in your child's school? And while these numbers are very close, most people said no. And that is a big thing, because in order for caregivers to want to participate in schools, they have to feel valued. They have to feel involved, and if they're not included in any of these things, nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to change. So this is a huge outcome here. The second question we asked was, have you attended the most recent parent-teacher conference night or school family event? If not, what is the biggest barrier to you not being to attend? So for the first part of that question, most of the parents were able to attend those schools. So that was 71 people who have been able to attend those types of meetings. But for the people who said no, the #1 answer was the time of the conference. So the barrier there was, most conferences happen between 2:45 and 5:45. I don't know about you, but I'm still working at that time. So there's no way that I'm going to leave my work. As much as important as my kids' education is, I'm not leaving work to go sit and talk to a teacher for 2 or 3 minutes. That's just unreasonable. And so this is another piece of information from the survey that was so important, because this is an easy, low-hanging fruit that schools could see. Like, this was a barrier. It wasn't the fact that the caregivers didn't care or didn't want to attend. It was the fact that they couldn't, because the time was not reasonable. Yeah. So the third question we asked was, how often have you seen your child's principal interact with your parents, students, or staff? Most people said never. Again, that is a huge deal here, because the principal is the person that runs the school. And if the caregiver is not seeing the principal interact with anybody, then what's going on in that school? So again, this question speaks to the part of whether or not people are being heard at their school, but also how they're going to interact with the principal. If they feel like their principal is not involved, they're going to come with a deficit. So if I think you aren't involved and I only see you when something bad happens, our interaction is always going to be negative. And so having this idea of, are your principals being seen, and it's not only a negative interaction, changes the perspective and changes those interactions with caregivers. Excuse me. So let's talk about the importance of this data. So the reason, before I get into these points here, I really want to talk about the importance of Black people owning their data. A lot of the information and the research that has been done throughout the decades, centuries, whatever, is important, but it's always been done at universities, at large research companies, and also the government, obviously. And I don't want to knock the information that we've gotten from those data points, but there's a huge value of me being at this organization and being able to create these projects, these initiatives, where I'm able to initiate and collect the data, identify why this data is important, and also keeping it here. Because that's the one thing that is honestly exploited when it comes to Black data. Like, we are always being studied. We never have access to that data unless someone else has the money to do it. And so I know that we may not all have the money and the means to do this, but data is so important when we own it. Because we can make sure that it's in line with what we want to do. We can make the necessary changes, and the type of data that we're looking for is not always the data that these big universities and these companies are looking for. And so when we have a say with the data that we have, we can change the world, to be quite honest. And we can make more informed decisions about the things that we're doing in our neighborhoods, cities, counties, states, etc. And then data is also important because we have data-driven policies. Like, we can't change what we know. That is the thing that I always say. We cannot change anything if we don't know. If we don't have the data to say why X is informing Y, we can't do anything about it. And so having this data is important to drive those decision making, but also identify barriers for any of the issues that are happening, as well as intersectional identities. And so I'm not going to go through all of this, but I think those are the three major points that I wanted to pull from this. So let's talk about making it practical. Like I said, I'm in a unique organization where I was able to come on and really drive the change when it when we talk about data. And so to conduct a survey in your area, the first step you really need to know is your audience. Like you saw, this survey was 3 questions. I don't know if you've ever taken a survey before, but most of them are not 3 questions. And so if you're someone like me, I am a researcher, any survey that's available, I'm going to take it. Why? Because I know the importance of response rates. The higher the response rates, the more generalizations you can make. If you're someone like my brother who hates surveys, you know you can't get a survey. I don't care what it is about, he is not going to take that survey. So you have to identify who your audience is and make it accessible to them to make sure that we're getting the best responses for the data that we want. And so when we talk about response rates, the national average of response rates is only 30%. That's extremely low. I'm not saying that there hasn't been studies and other projects that have reached higher response rates, but generally people hate taking surveys unless there's an incentive. And so we also have to think about what is the carrot that's going to drive the needle when we want people to identify or respond to these surveys. So additionally, with knowing your audience, you also have some really great resources available that does not require money. Google is free. I love to say that, that's like my friend. Everything to say, Google is my best friend and it's free. Google has Google Forms that you can use for free to create surveys for your area. And then the great thing about Google Forms is every time a response comes in, they automatically create these charts and tables and bar graphs that already analyzes your data. So again, that is easy. All you gotta do is create the survey, have a little QR code that comes out with it, and then you don't need to hire anybody to do any analysis because it's all there for you. But if you want to be more advanced and do something like Qualtrics, which is another advanced statistical database that you can use for surveys, that costs a lot more money. But another way to do that is look for volunteer support. There are a ton of grad students, and I say this as a former grad student. I would have loved any opportunity to work with the organization to do some analytics or do some project that with surveys or any sort of data project for free. You have that available to you if you check in with your local or university and college. Those grad students specifically, I would not to knock undergrads, but grad students, there's a level of commitment and type of statistical analysis that's required in your programming. And so if you want this type of support, definitely go with a grad student. And I guarantee you somebody's going to say, yes, please hire me for free to do this work. And I also want to say there's a little caveat with that too, because I also used to work for a university. Universities can be bullies sometimes, especially when it comes to the data. If they are collecting the data, they're going to say, well, this is ours, so I don't know how you're going to get this. You can use it, but at the end of the day, it's ours. So just keep that in mind when you're using the universities that they may try to bully you, but stand up and say, well, this is our initiative, and make sure you have an MOU or something in place to say that we own the data. You may be collecting the data, but we own it. Because again, it's so important for Black folks to own their data. So I am happy to discuss more in depth as we go into the Q&A portion of this piece about data questions that we have about this survey, but that's all that I wanted to add here.
Can I just pick you back off of what you were saying? That like, girl, I love that. That PowerPoint looks so nice. I love that design. But the things that everything that she just brought up are true. Those 3 questions are the 3 questions my parents came up with. We made a Google form. We had the QR code ready. We went to schools at dismissal and asked parents those questions. And if we ran into a parent, like we run into parents all like, hey, can I ask you a couple questions? No. Like, okay, come back next week and be like, how often have you seen your principal? you know, like what was the last parent-teacher conference? Did you get to go? Why didn't you go? Oh, really? So honestly, we put together that data ourselves. And we did, and like, again, met parents where they are. We're like, you know what? The majority of people are gonna be there at dismissal. They're gonna be standing there about a good 30 minutes before the kids get out. They're just standing there. Might as well go ask them a couple questions. And then, like you said, we had some people that we would say, you can scan the QR code and do it yourself. But they'd be there and we were walking around, we're literally answering the questions for you on our phones. I'm like, okay, thank you, have a great day. So you can gather your data, really, you can gather your data yourself.
And I want to piggyback on that and say, going back to the students. So that's where you can even use an undergraduate student who's also looking for internship opportunities. Like if you need someone to be out on the ground saying, hey, I'm going to help answer these questions for you, that's a great way to use their time and resources where they're not keeping your data. And so, again, if this is something that you don't necessarily have the funds for, talking to your local universities to find students to do this work is also a great opportunity for that. So we're going to open this portion up for questions. So if you have any, please come up to the mic. And if you're streaming, please drop them in the chat and we're happy to answer them. We are. Or you can just shout them out. Well, probably don't shout them out. I'm getting a no. Come to the mic, please.
Good afternoon. Wonderful presentation. Wayne Brown, Early, Nebraska. So did you get any pushback from the school district about collecting data from parents? Is anything about FERPA, or this is our data too, or, I mean?
No, we did not.
Okay.
Two reasons. Number one, I used to work for CPS. So I knew a lot of the principals. Number two, I always called the principal first. So somebody in the district knew, it just maybe wasn't the people in the administrative office. But your principal knew. I always make sure your principal knew, or at least your head secretary. But somebody in the building knew that we were coming. And I always, when we were doing the surveys that day, we always utilized the parent who had a child in that school.
Hi, I'm Adana from the Atlanta area. How are you all?
Great.
I really enjoyed the presentation. You gave a lot of wise nuggets. I'm very grateful for that. I'm wondering, first of all, I'm a DEI practitioner. I have my own 501c3 as well as my own consultancy. I have a scholar practitioner entrepreneurship model thing going on in life. And as a DEI practitioner internal to a Fortune 100 hospitality services company, I often get pushback on the amount of work that I do in comparison to others, just given the holistic approach that I typically take in addressing things that I believe will prevent blind spots from eroding a path that you go down when you do a phased implementation approach. And my question to you pertains to the fact that you gave some excellent questions. How do you feel seen, do you feel valued, do you feel heard? And in your action plan that came out of that data gathering process, was your implementation plan more phased so that it was more bite-sized nugget type thing over time? Or, you know, even if it were contingent phases, or was it more holistic in the sense that you captured all of that data and then captured all of your actions relevant to that data going forward in a circular fashion?
That's a really great question. And because CPS is an entity that we would have to work with to implement the engagement scale, that is something that's still technically in process, and we're not really sure where we are in that process. But in an ideal world, I always go with the approach of bite size. A lot of change too quickly can fail, unfortunately, because people don't like change, even though change is inevitable. And so laying out a plan with actionable steps, with a step-based approach to say, by this year, or even like in 3 months, we're going to accomplish this task. And then in that 3-month time frame, see where we are, what barriers we ran into, anything that prevented us from achieving that goal, and then trying to attack that barrier, and then moving on to the next step once it's achieved. So I always push for that incremental change, because I think that's going to get the best buy-in.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate the insight.
Of course, thank you.
our organization do give stipends to complete our surveys, but there's not a complete follow-up. They don't follow up with it, or we don't even know if the information is relevant or truth because they know that they're getting paid. So that stipend with surveys just have us unbalanced a lot. And when you were speaking of the MOUs with universities, well, we did that with our organization to do another program. So it was like, oh, they're doing conferences and had our stuff. And then they said, okay, well, we're going to do an MOU so y'all can get it started. And we had to go backwards. It says, no, we need to do an MOU with your university so that you can no longer use our information to start our program. So again, back to the question about how effective is the survey of your experience receiving a stipend?
We didn't give a stipend for our surveys. The only thing that I would probably say anybody, I was gonna make sure you paid.
Right.
I'm always gonna feed you, no matter what we doing. But that was pretty much it. So we didn't give any kind of stipend or any kind of money. And the way we approached it is we kind of identified our leaders early and subconsciously put them in categories. So there were certain people that no matter what, you're gonna be there, you're all in. There are certain people, you're gonna come to the event, it's gonna be halfway over, but you're gonna show up. There's some people, I'm never gonna see you, but you're gonna post it on Facebook, and you're gonna send, a pizza or two. And so, if you, to approach it differently, if you feel like you wanna get more accurate data, I would start dividing your people up into the type of leaders that they are. And so, when we're doing a survey, we're gonna focus on this group here in this group, and we're gonna have them lead the survey. These folks over here, we're gonna give it to them, but their data is gonna be kind of like outlined. That's the thing.
It is, actually.
What else I found too is when I want to do a survey and the principal is like, I don't know, I just don't do it on school grounds. I don't do it on rough ground. I go across the street and get my survey.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch on the incentives when it comes to surveys. So there's a good and bad with that. So sometimes surveys, if they're too long and there's incentive, I'm just gonna respond. And like, okay, well, I'm just gonna put these things. But other times, if it's a subject or the person is very passionate about what the survey is about, the incentive doesn't matter. And so I think you take that, you have to weigh your audience, right? So if it's an audience, if it's not a captivated audience, maybe having an incentive, and it doesn't always have to be money, it could be some, people also like free things. Yeah. So anything offering for free might be available for you, but I think the audience always is going to drive whether or not you have an incentive or not.
I love it. Without parents, none of this is possible.
Amen.
Hello, my name is Kwanzaa Billy. I'm the advocacy chair for Urban League Young Professionals and a local community organizer in DC and social impact strategist. So when I saw community organizer, I was like, I'm gonna ask this question. So I'm currently working to stand up 2 education councils, mainly of parents, educators, and young people in 2 boards in Washington, D.C. But what I'm coming up against are like the local politics, and just like a power struggle, and most folks who have done this work is kind of like a stepping stone to run for something larger. How, in your experience organizing parents and just a community around education initiatives or agendas, have you navigated that to get them to kind of work together and on one page without derailing like your end goals? I see your face.
And you said DC, girl, so I'm like, Lord. I'm gonna go back to what Kendra said. No, you're obvious. Specifically in DC, only because now I do work on the congressional side.
Okay.
You have to connect with somebody. Especially in DC, it's about connections. You have got to make a connection with someone who's already done the work, someone that people on both sides of the community, so like your Hill people and your community people both trust. Because in DC, that's the biggest issue. It's an issue of trust. And they especially don't, when you're not from that 50-mile radius of the Beltway, they're like, oh, you're just trying to come and take our funding? Oh yeah. So you connect with try to connect with folks that you are knowing in the area, but that can help you build those trust and those relationships with people in the area. I would think that would be the best way. And then even here in Cincinnati, that's kind of what I did. Like I said, I was kind of I had a shoe-in already because I had taught at CPS for 7 years. So I knew that, you know, the school's number ends in 00, the main secretary ends in 01, so I never called the 00 number. You know, I know, you know what I'm saying? So certain things that you know about the community in the area, utilize that to your advantage. I don't want to say like, you know, do something underhanded. Don't do nothing illegal, but you might have to call somebody here in Cincinnati that knows someone in DC. You're just gonna have to find different ways to make those connections because in DC it's just a different path.
Yes, and like you said, trust is a major thing. What I've been finding, a lot of the parents, folks have tried this so many times that parents are like, okay, and I've only been here 7 years, and so I was recommended for this because of the work I've been able to do in other spaces. But now it's like, well, I already did this for free. Why didn't you, tap me to do this? And then folks are like, well, I'll do it for political clout, but not necessarily to further education in the district. So that's like the biggest hurdle that I'm facing right now. All right, I gotta find an insider pretty much. Okay, thank you.
Let's exchange information, and I can put you in touch with people in our office and then some other outreach directors that are in DC.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? I mean, if there's no more questions, we can wrap up.
Clearly go get some more shrimp.
Wait, there's someone. Now people gonna be mad that I'm kidding.
Yeah, that person, but y'all already had the shrimp, so I figured I would. Can you all talk a little bit about how you're going to share your data back with the parents that you surveyed and the community, and like what your next steps are going to be?
Well, we actually did present the entire spectrum of engagement. Some of the data that you all saw that Kendra shared was actually part of a larger PowerPoint presentation. So we actually took that to the school board about a year ago, shared it with them. We also shared it with a couple, just schools, like I said, through the parents that we know, and making sure that they know and that they are sharing the spectrum of engagement with their school administrators. But as far as working it through the entire district, that is something that I feel like the league is still working on. But I feel like we're getting the data out there, but also just getting out the word. We had t-shirts made that says like I'm seeing value in her. So just making sure that we're out in the community, more people know about the Black Caregiver Network, and just trying to build more parent power. I think has been the best way to really get the data out there. And I'm hoping that, if we do the survey in like 2024, that we'll see better results, at least in the schools that we have seen, be able to implement some of this work.
In an ideal world, I would love to push the survey out wide to the rest of the county, just to kind of get more information about what we're seeing, if this is true for everywhere else like it is here, but also replicate it. So we want to know, has anything changed in the year that we put out this survey? I would love to do that in the next year or two and see. So these are the things that people said they did not feel seen, valued, or heard. How has that changed in the 2 or 3 years that this survey went out? So that is my thing that I would love to do, but we'll see if that actually happens.
Right, because we just did 5 elementary schools. There are 63 schools in CPS's district. Yeah, so I agree with Kendra. It would be really good to push it out to the rest of the district and see if we get the same result.
It's okay.
I'm from Kids First Chicago, and so one of my questions is, as a parent, because I'm also a senior community engagement manager, I'm also a CPS Chicago Public School parent, and so we're often asked to do a lot of surveys, give a lot of input, and it's really great to receive like what those results are, but it's even greater when we're invited to come talk about the solutions for the things that we're seeing in the data. So just wondering how you plan to sort of bring parents in to start talking about how it can be different and how they would like for that to look different.
So one of the things that we do, yeah, of course. One of the things that we love to do here at Urban League is community engagement. community education piece. And that is, now that we have this beautiful new space, we're open to inviting more people in to share all of the initiatives that we have. The last panel that we just had earlier this month, this has nothing to do with education, but I'm gonna put this out there because I did it. We had a panel to talk about use of force cases here in Hamilton County. And so the intention with that panel was to educate the community about what the use of force cases look like in the sheriff's office. And so similar to that, that's what we want to do with all of the data that we collect and share for whatever topic area that is. And so for the things that you heard, the Black Caregiver Network, I would love to continue to do these conversations where we continue to invite parents, the CPS parents here in the room, and share this information, because I'm sure a lot of them still don't know that this was done, or even if anything has been done since in the schools that it was shared with. And then also initiating those conversations of, well, this didn't happen at my school, but I would love to do this again. This is another way that we can partner with the community to replicate, do another survey, because I love surveys. As we already established.
That's why your dad come on. And then also when we were wrapping up in 2022, that seems so far away, we actually did do a live stream town hall, parent town hall from Carson Elementary, which is one of the schools. And it was also bilingual, so we had a translator there, we had parents that were physically there, and then we had over 100 parents that streamed it live. And then we also, the Center for Social Justice hosted once a month a Facebook Live called an Education Conversation, where we talked about different solutions. We brought on different education experts to talk about different ways to look at education, and we always make sure that we blasted that to all our parents as well.
Any other questions? You guys should go house.
Let's give these ladies a round of applause. Once again, we have Miss Kelly Dukes and Miss Kendra Reed. Two of my favorite people too. Yes, ladies. Before we leave, I want to do a little bit of a roll call. We're gonna wrap up, but West Coast, where y'all at? Seattle. Where y'all? What cities are y'all from in the room? San Diego. I said West Coast. Seattle. All right, East Coast. We have what? Philly in the building, Detroit. I ain't been out yet. I said y'all gonna hear about me. Yet the DMV is present. Okay, VA. Y'all in my house though, so welcome to Cincinnati, Ohio. I hope you all have enjoyed your time here at the Earth League Greater. Yeah. It ain't none like your friends and family straightening your crown. Y'all don't be laughing. No. We are from the Midwest. That's all I want to say. Detroit. It is so great to have you all. And Houston is present. Yes, you are. Right here. See, now I'm going to have to tighten y'all up. All right. The educator here in me is this. You can hear my voice clap once. All right. No, I hope you all enjoyed yourself, but not only enjoyed yourself, I hope you all have left or leaving us with some resources. I want you all to repeat after me. I will. Connect. I will. Celebrate. I will. Collaborate. I think it's very important for you all to know that you are not defenseless. You are in good company. There's so many resources. Please use them. The other thing, I know I have some housekeeping. If you all, we have provided snacks out in the convening area for you all to take with you. I know that we're all responsible for all transportation, but help our staff here clean up if you would not put all of your items into the trash. Leave with somebody else's contact information. I think that's really, really important. And network piece, don't forget that. We'd like to thank the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio for hosting here at our Holloman Center. And without further ado, go and be great, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.